history doesn't sleep quietly. It leaves behind echoes, unfinished stories pressed into stone, ink, and bone. Tonight, we follow those echoes across centuries, where timelines fracture and certainty thins. How did empires vanish without a final scream? What knowledge was built, buried, or erased before it could change the world? From vanished cities to coded messages and impossible artifacts, each question pulls us deeper, frame by frame. This isn't myth, it's evidence waiting to be read. So sit back, steady your breath, and let's dive in. 3 hours, countless mysteries, explained, told with clarity and care. A pale sun rises over the Mediterranean, its light muted, as if filtered through ash or fog. The sea reflects not blue, but gray. Somewhere inland, olive groves stand still beneath a dim sky that never seems to fully clear. This is not a single place, but a shared experience, recorded across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, during a year that many chroniclers would later describe with unease, 536. Contemporary observers struggled to explain what they were seeing. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave off its light without brightness, like the moon, for nearly an entire year. In China, official records mention summer frost, crop failures, and a yellowish haze that blotted out the sky. Irish annals quietly note years without bread. Tree rings from Scandinavia to North America confirm what the texts suggest. Growth nearly stopped. Something had dimmed the world. Modern science offers a structured explanation. Ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica show layers rich in volcanic sulfate dating to the mid-6th century. Many researchers believe a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland, possibly elsewhere, sent vast quantities of ash and aerosols into the atmosphere. These particles could have reflected sunlight back into space, cooling the planet and disrupting weather patterns for years. Some studies suggest not one eruption, but a sequence. 536, followed by others in 540 and 547, creating a prolonged climatic shock. Yet even within this framework, uncertainty remains. No single volcano has been definitively identified. The scale required to produce such global effects is immense, and historical records of eruptions are fragmented. Was the source volcanic alone, or did multiple natural forces overlap? Solar anomalies, oceanic shifts, atmospheric feedback loops. The human consequences were profound. Archaeological evidence points to widespread famine. In parts of Europe, settlement patterns change abruptly, with villages abandoned and populations declining. In China, the collapse of the Northern Wei dynasty follows years of instability linked to climate stress. The Eastern Roman Empire, already strained, would soon face the Justinianic plague, compounding suffering. While the darkness did not cause these events outright, it may have weakened societies just enough for disaster to take hold. Some researchers frame 536 as the opening chapter of what they call Late Antique Little Ice Age, a period of cooler temperatures lasting more than a century. In this view, the darkness was not an isolated anomaly, but a turning point, one that subtly reshaped trade routes, agriculture, and political power. Climate, long treated as background, becomes an active force in history. Beyond mainstream explanations, other ideas circulate quietly at the edges of discussion. A comet or meteor impact has been proposed based on descriptions of strange lights and atmospheric phenomena. Others speculate about massive wildfires or oceanic methane releases. These theories remain unproven, lacking the physical evidence that volcanic explanations provide, yet they persist because the historical descriptions feel so absolute, so unfamiliar. A sun without warmth, summers without harvest, There is also the question of perception. How did people of the 6th century understand a sky that betrayed them? Religious writings from the period interpret the darkness as a sign, divine displeasure, an omen of change, a warning written across the heavens. In a world where cosmic order and earthly order were deeply linked, a dim sun could shake belief itself. What makes the 536 event especially unsettling is not just its cause, but its reach. This was not a regional drought or a local catastrophe. It was global, silent, and slow-moving. No single moment of destruction, just months and years of dimness, cold, and hunger. A reminder that the planet can change without warning, and that human systems, however complex, remain fragile. Even today, the evidence continues to accumulate piece by piece. Ice cores, sediment layers, ancient texts re-examined with modern tools. And yet, the full picture remains incomplete. We can measure the ash, chart the cooling, trace the suffering, but the precise sequence of events, the true trigger, still slips just beyond certainty. When the sun finally returned to its former strength, the world it illuminated was no longer the same. Civilizations adapted, transformed, or disappeared. And the question lingers, quietly but persistently. If the skies once darkened so completely, and for so long, what else in our past waits to be understood, hidden in plain sight above our heads? As the light slowly returns to the ancient world after years of dim skies and failed harvests, history does not settle into calm. Instead, it drifts forward, quietly, unevenly, toward another moment of profound uncertainty. Centuries earlier, long before the darkness of 536, a different kind of shadow had already fallen across the ancient world. One that did not dim the sun, but unraveled civilizations themselves. Along the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, stone walls lie broken and half buried in dust. Once busy harbors sit silent, their waters undisturbed by sails. In the ruins of palaces from Mycenae to Ugarit, ash clings to the floors, frozen in time. Clay tablets, hastily fired by accidental flames, preserve final messages never meant to last. This is the world at the end of the Bronze Age, around 1200 BC, caught in the moment of collapse. For centuries, the great powers of the late Bronze Age had been deeply connected. Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean kingdoms, and city-states across Anatolia, Cyprus, and Palestine formed a fragile web of trade and diplomacy. Tin traveled hundreds of miles to meet copper, forming bronze, the metal that defined an era. Grain shipments crossed seas, royal marriages sealed alliances. Letters written in Akkadian passed between kings who called each other brother. Then, within a few decades, much of it vanished. Archaeological layers show widespread destruction. Cities burned, fortifications hastily rebuilt, then abandoned. Writing systems disappeared in some regions for generations. In Greece, palace centers fell silent, ushering in centuries with no written records at all. The Hittite capital of Hattusa was deserted. Ugarit's final tablet speaks of enemy ships on the horizon, sent, it seems, just before the city was destroyed. The question that has lingered for more than a century is deceptively simple. What happened? Early explanations focused on invasion. Egyptian inscriptions describe attacks by groups later called the Sea Peoples, migrating forces arriving by land and sea, unsettling coastal regions. Reliefs from the reign of Ramesses III depict fierce battles, ships colliding, bodies in the water. Some scholars see these groups as displaced populations, pushed from their homelands by famine or conflict, arriving as both refugees and raiders. But invasion alone struggles to explain the scale and coordination of the collapse. How could multiple powerful states fall almost simultaneously? Why were inland cities, far from the coast, also abandoned? Attention gradually turned inward. The Late Bronze Age was a system built on complexity. Long-distance trade, centralized administration, and elite control made societies efficient, but brittle. A disruption in one region could cascade across the entire network. If tin shipments failed, bronze production stalled. If harvests declined, urban populations suffered first. Climate evidence adds another layer. Pollen records and sediment cores suggest prolonged droughts in parts of the eastern Mediterranean around the late 13th century BC. Letters from the period speak of grain shortages and desperation. A Hittite king pleads with Egypt for food. Fields may have failed not once, but repeatedly, straining already fragile systems. Earthquakes, too, leave their mark. Some cities show patterns of destruction consistent with seismic activity. The eastern Mediterranean sits along active fault lines, and a sequence of major earthquakes, sometimes called an earthquake storm, has been proposed. Walls toppled, infrastructure shattered, populations displaced. But earthquakes, like invasions, feel incomplete on their own. More recent interpretations see the Bronze Age collapse not as a single event, but as a convergence. Climate stress weakens agriculture. Trade networks falter. Political authority erodes. Migrations increase. Rebellions grow harder to contain. In such a scenario, even minor shocks can become fatal. Systems fail not because of one blow, but because resilience has quietly drained away. Yet mysteries remain. Why did some regions recover quickly, while others entered centuries of decline? Why did iron, once rare, begin to replace bronze soon after? Was this technological shift a response to scarcity or a coincidence of timing? And how did cultural memory absorb such a rupture, transforming heroic ages into legends of lost greatness? At the edges of scholarship, more speculative ideas circulate. Some propose widespread pandemics, moving along trade routes that once sustained prosperity. Others point to social upheaval, internal revolutions where common people turned against elite centers that no longer protected or provided for them. There are even suggestions of celestial events, remembered dimly in myth: falling stars, angry gods, a world out of balance. These ideas remain difficult to prove, resting on fragments and interpretation rather than clear evidence. Still, they persist because the collapse feels too total, too synchronized to be fully explained by familiar causes alone. What is clear is that the world that emerged afterward was different. Smaller communities replaced palace economies. Writing systems were simplified or lost. Power decentralized. New identities formed in the vacuum left behind. Out of collapse came transformation, but at a cost measured in lost knowledge, broken continuity, and centuries of rebuilding. Standing among the ruins today, it is tempting to search for a single answer, a final cause. But the Bronze Age collapse resists simplicity. It unfolds like a slow unraveling, threads snapping one by one until the fabric can no longer hold. And so the mystery remains suspended in time. Was this collapse inevitable? The price of complexity itself? Or was there a moment, one failed harvest, one broken alliance, one decision too late, that tipped the balance? Somewhere beneath the dust of these abandoned cities, the echoes of that turning point may still be waiting to be heard. As the smoke from the burned palaces of the Late Bronze Age still lingers in memory, a new question emerges from the ashes. Who were the Sea Peoples? The Mediterranean coastline, from the Nile Delta to the shores of Cyprus, bears silent witness to their passage. Harbors once bustling with merchants lie empty or littered with debris. Ships described in Egyptian reliefs are carved into stone with remarkable detail. Long, slender hulls bristling with oars, figures poised as though frozen in the moment of attack. And yet, the identities of those who sailed these vessels remain shrouded in uncertainty. The first glimpses we have of the Sea Peoples come from Egyptian records, particularly from the reign of Ramesses III around 1175 BC. Temple walls depict battles at sea and on land. Warriors in feathered helmets clash with Egyptian defenders, ships collide in chaotic waters, and captives are led away. Names: Peliset, Checker, Shekelesh, Denyen, Weshesh appear in hieroglyphs, but these designations tell us little about origin or culture. Were these long-established groups displaced by famine, conflict, or the collapse of neighboring societies? Or were they opportunistic raiders drawn by the vulnerabilities of Egypt and the eastern Mediterranean? Archaeological evidence provides tantalizing yet incomplete clues. In coastal towns across Cyprus and the Levant, layers of destruction correspond to the period of the Sea Peoples' incursions. Weapons, pottery, and remnants of fortifications hint at sudden violence. Yet the material record is patchy. Some regions show signs of continuity rather than collapse. Others are abandoned entirely. It is as if a shadow passed over the Mediterranean, visible only in fragments. Mainstream historians often link the Sea Peoples to broader patterns of upheaval during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC. The collapse of Mycenaean palaces, the weakening of Hittite power, and widespread famine could have created conditions for migration and aggression. In this view, the Sea Peoples were not a single, monolithic group, but a fluid coalition of displaced peoples seeking new lands and resources. Yet this explanation, while plausible, raises as many questions as it answers. How did these groups coordinate attacks over hundreds of miles of coastline? How did they achieve such repeated success against the organized armies of Egypt? Speculative theories take us further into uncertainty. Some suggest the Sea Peoples originated from the Aegean Islands, driven by drought, famine, or internal conflict. Others propose Anatolian origins, linked to unrest in Western Hittite territories. There are even theories placing them in the central Mediterranean, Sardinia, Sicily, or southern Italy, drawing connections between names preserved in Egyptian inscriptions and later historical populations. Each hypothesis finds some support in artifacts, linguistics, or myth, yet none can be definitively proven. Linguistic and cultural traces deepen the mystery. Names like Peliset, often linked to the Philistines of later biblical texts in Palestine, suggest migration and resettlement. Pottery styles and weapon designs hint at connections across the Mediterranean. Could these movements reflect broader networks of trade, kinship, and shared technology? Or do they merely highlight how little we truly know about the people behind these dramatic events? Even the nature of the Sea Peoples' attacks invites reflection. Were they primarily raiders, seeking plunder and temporary gains? Or were they migrants, sometimes forced by circumstances beyond their control, who became entangled in violent conflict as they sought new homes? Egyptian inscriptions depict them in combative terms, yet these records are, inevitably, written by the defeated. How much of what survives reflects reality, and how much reflects the lens of those trying to frame a narrative of triumph over chaos? Some archaeologists suggest environmental pressures played a role. Evidence of famine, drought, and coastal erosion in various Mediterranean regions coincides with the timing of the Sea Peoples' activity. Could shifts in climate have displaced entire populations, setting them on collision courses with established states? Or did the movements emerge from social and political tensions, local uprisings that coalesced into coordinated maritime campaigns? Perhaps both factors interacted, producing waves of migration and conflict across a fragile network of civilizations. What is striking is the scale and speed of the Sea Peoples' impact. From the Nile Delta to the Levant, from Cyprus to Anatolia, fortified centers fall, trade collapses, and cultural continuity is disrupted. Yet, paradoxically, some areas show resilience, absorbing newcomers or rebuilding in new forms. The mosaic of destruction and adaptation underscores that history does not operate in a single direction. Chaos and continuity coexist, sometimes unpredictably. Despite centuries of study, the origins and identities of the Sea Peoples remain elusive. We have Egyptian reliefs, scattered artifacts, and tantalizing textual clues, but no single source that tells the full story. The peoples themselves vanish from history almost as suddenly as they appeared, leaving behind only shadows on stone, fragments of pottery, and names that echo faintly in later populations. And so, standing at the edge of this mystery, we are left with questions rather than answers. Were the Sea Peoples a migratory coalition, forced into conflict by environmental collapse? Were they opportunistic raiders exploiting a world already weakened by famine and political instability? Or does the truth lie somewhere in between, lost to time and memory? Perhaps, somewhere beneath the waters and sediments of the Eastern Mediterranean, traces of their origins still wait to be uncovered, waiting for a lens sharp enough to bring them into focus. In contemplating the Sea Peoples, we confront a paradox familiar to anyone who studies history's great mysteries. We see the consequences clearly: destruction, migration, upheaval. But the causes, the human story behind the movement, remain almost entirely hidden. It is a reminder that the past is often a place of shadows, and that even the most vivid events leave behind more questions than answers, inviting us to continue searching, wondering, and imagining what might still be buried beneath the waves and sands of time. As we trace the shadows of the Sea Peoples across the Mediterranean, we are reminded that the past often speaks in whispers, hidden in places we rarely consider. Far from palaces and battlefields, far above human settlements, lie the frozen archives of Earth itself, glaciers and polar ice sheets that have quietly preserved the climate and events of millennia. Here, in the silence of Greenland and Antarctica, a forgotten catastrophe is waiting to be read, one recorded not in letters or stone, but in layers of ice, dust, and trapped air bubbles. The story begins with a core sample, a cylinder of ice extracted from depths hundreds of meters below the surface. Each layer is a page, a record of a single year, of snowfall compacted into history. In these layers, scientists have found unusual concentrations of sulfate, chemical fingerprints of massive volcanic eruptions or extraordinary atmospheric events. Some layers correspond to periods of known upheaval, such as the volcanic eruption that triggered the 536 AD global darkness. Others, however, point to events less familiar, more mysterious. Around 1628 BC, ice cores reveal a spike in volcanic sulfate, unlike anything in the surrounding centuries. The anomaly is abrupt and pronounced, suggesting a sudden and catastrophic injection of material into the stratosphere. Yet the records from human civilizations of the time, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, make little mention of it. Unlike the carefully chronicled darkness of 536 AD, this catastrophe appears to have passed into history almost unnoticed. Its subtlety in the human record contrasts sharply with its dramatic fingerprint in the ice. Modern science offers plausible explanations. Such spikes can result from massive volcanic eruptions, the kind powerful enough to throw millions of tons of ash into the upper atmosphere, dimming sunlight for months or even years. Volcanic dust can cool the climate, disrupt agriculture, and trigger crop failures. Tree rings from Europe and North America indicate stunted growth during this period, corroborating the idea of environmental stress. Yet the eruption responsible has not been definitively located. Could it have been in the tropics, where ash could spread globally, or in a remote volcanic region now lost beneath glaciers or oceans? Some researchers suggest that this forgotten catastrophe may have contributed to the upheavals of the Late Bronze Age. Archaeological evidence points to widespread societal stress around the same time. Palace collapses, abandoned settlements, disruptions in trade networks. Could a massive but unrecorded environmental event have weakened societies just as invasions and migrations swept across the Mediterranean? Was this spike in sulfate a silent catalyst, subtly tipping the balance between order and collapse? Others speculate beyond the volcanic explanation. Could a comet or meteor impact account for such a sudden injection of particles into the atmosphere? Certain layers contain microscopic spherules, tiny glassy beads sometimes associated with high-energy impacts. While no crater has been definitively linked to the 1628 BC anomaly, some theorists suggest a small to moderate impact over the ocean, dispersing material widely yet leaving little trace on land. Could such a celestial event have been invisible to the chroniclers of the time, leaving only the climate as a witness? There are also theories about large-scale wildfires, fueled by unusual drought conditions. Layers of charcoal in some ice cores suggest widespread burning, potentially adding to atmospheric particles. Could simultaneous environmental stresses, volcanoes, fires, drought, have combined to create a catastrophe of such subtlety that human observers scarcely recognized it as extraordinary? Or did ancient societies perceive it in ways that have not survived, encoded perhaps in oral traditions or myths now lost? One of the most haunting aspects of this event is its invisibility in human records. Unlike the darkness of 536 AD, which left vivid accounts of a dimmed sun and failing crops, the 1628 BC catastrophe seems to have left no direct testimony. Civilization continued, albeit under strain, while the ice silently recorded the truth of the skies. What does this tell us about the fragility of human perception and memory? How many other events, equally dramatic in scale, have passed unnoticed, leaving only faint traces in the natural record? The more we study ice cores, the more they reveal the interconnectedness of climate and human history. A spike in sulfate hundreds or thousands of miles away could affect monsoons, rivers, and harvests, rippling through distant societies. In this sense, ice is both a mirror and a lens. It reflects environmental extremes and magnifies the subtle forces that shape human destiny. Yet even with these modern tools, the full story remains elusive. Standing before a glacier, it is tempting to feel the weight of time pressing downward, each meter of ice a record of centuries and civilizations. Within these frozen layers lie unanswered questions. What exactly caused the 1628 BC spike? How did it affect societies from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley? And how many other forgotten catastrophes remain hidden, waiting to be discovered in ice, sediment, or coral, their stories lost to ordinary perception? As we examine these frozen archives, we are reminded that history is rarely linear. Catastrophe and resilience, visibility and silence intertwine. Some events blaze across memory like the recorded darkness of 536 AD, while others leave only a faint chemical whisper in ice, waiting for centuries to be heard. And in that whisper lies the invitation to look deeper, to question what we think we know, and to wonder how many threads of the past remain buried beneath the surface, quietly shaping the world we inherit. As we emerge from the silent testimony of ice cores, revealing catastrophes that left little trace in human memory, we turn our gaze to another enigma, visible not in snow or ash, but carved into stone across continents. The sudden and mysterious cessation of megalith construction worldwide. From the windswept plains of Western Europe to the deserts of the Middle East, from the islands of the Pacific to the highlands of South America, massive stones once rose with careful precision, aligned with the sun, moon, and stars. And then, abruptly, the quarries fell silent. Imagine standing in the shadow of a megalithic monument, its surface worn by centuries of wind and rain. You trace the edges of stones taller than a man, arranged in circles, avenues, or astronomical alignments. In Brittany, France, the Karnak stones stretch for kilometers, their purpose obscured by millennia. In Malta, the temples of Hagar Chim and Monajdra rise in complex patterns, perfectly oriented to the solstices. Across the seas, the moai of Easter Island loom silently, guardians of a vanished culture. These structures share no immediate connection in geography or culture, yet the timing of their creation and their sudden disappearance raises profound questions. For thousands of years, humans had mastered the monumental. They moved stones weighing tens, sometimes hundreds of tons, erected circles, tombs, and temples, and developed techniques sophisticated enough to endure the passage of millennia. Then, around the late 3rd and early 2nd millennia BC in some regions, and varying across continents in others, this era of global megalithic ambition abruptly waned. Quarry sites were abandoned. Monumental projects ceased. Communities that had once devoted decades, sometimes centuries, to a single structure suddenly turned inward, focusing on smaller-scale settlements, practical agriculture, or different forms of ritual expression. Archaeologists have proposed a range of explanations. Environmental shifts, including climate cooling or drought, could have forced societies to redirect energy from ritual and monumental construction to survival. Changes in social structures, such as the collapse of centralized authority or the rise of new political hierarchies, might have disrupted the organization needed for such large-scale projects. Resource depletion, whether timber for sledges or stone from nearby quarries, could have rendered the continuation of megalithic programs impractical. Yet, none of these explanations fully accounts for the synchronicity observed across distant regions. Why would disparate societies, separated by oceans and thousands of kilometers, abandon a practice they had independently mastered almost simultaneously? Was there a shared human impulse, social, religious, or psychological, that shifted priorities across continents? Or did subtle environmental or celestial phenomena inspire a global recalibration of effort and belief? Speculative theories wander even further. Some suggest that the sudden halt in megalithic activity reflects shifts in cosmic awareness, an understanding of astronomy, ritual, or calendrical systems that evolved beyond stone. Others propose that cataclysmic events, such as tsunamis, earthquakes, or even solar anomalies, may have made monumental construction perilous or seemingly futile. Could societies have recognized forces beyond their control, responding by abandoning labor-intensive expressions of human ambition in favor of survival or introspection? Consider the striking alignments many megaliths share with celestial phenomena: solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles. These patterns suggest a sophisticated understanding of the heavens, integrated with human ritual and social cohesion. What happens when these systems are disrupted, whether by environmental catastrophe, population decline, or social upheaval? Might the knowledge of the stars continue in other, subtler ways, leaving only the silent stones as a testament to a forgotten era? The archaeological record is tantalizing but incomplete. Excavations reveal tools, unfinished stones, and abandoned settlements near monument sites. Oral traditions, myths, and later religious texts hint at the memory of these constructions, yet rarely explain the sudden stop. Across the globe, the phenomenon seems to echo a larger pattern: societies reaching a peak of technological and organizational skill, then abruptly shifting direction. Was the cessation accidental, gradual, or deliberately chosen? And if deliberately chosen, what knowledge or insight motivated such a decision? It is tempting to see these monumental stones merely as relics of the past, silent artifacts frozen in time, but they are also markers of human ambition, ingenuity, and the mysterious forces that govern societal choices. When civilizations stop building, especially on such an ambitious scale, the silence itself becomes a question. What internal or external pressures were strong enough to override centuries of accumulated expertise to redirect the energy of entire communities away from the grandest of human endeavors? Standing today amid the remnants of these megaliths, one feels a profound tension between permanence and impermanence. The stones endure, weathered but unbroken, while the cultures that created them vanish into history, leaving only fragments of memory and technique. Each site asks us to consider the fragility of human enterprise, the interplay of environmental, social, and possibly cosmic forces, and the questions that survive even when answers do not. The sudden end of global megalithic construction reminds us that history is not always linear, and human progress is not inexorable. Civilization is punctuated by moments of brilliance, by achievements that seem to defy possibility, and by equally sudden pauses, where the course of societies veers in unexpected directions. And so we are left, as we stand before these silent giants, with questions as heavy and enduring as the stones themselves. Why did humanity stop reaching for the monumental? What forces, visible or invisible, were at play? And how many lessons remain hidden, waiting for the careful observer to uncover, etched in stone and memory alike? As the echoes of silent megaliths fade, we turn from stones that mark human ambition to a landscape marked by human violence, yet long hidden beneath layers of earth and peat, the Tollense Valley in northern Germany. Today, the valley is calm. Meadows stretch along a slow, meandering river, flanked by low hills and forests that whisper with the wind. But beneath this serene surface lies a chilling record of one of the largest prehistoric battles ever discovered in Europe, an event that has puzzled archaeologists and historians alike for decades. The first signs of the Tollense Valley Massacre emerged in the 1990s, when skeletal remains were found embedded in the riverbed. At first, they were assumed to be isolated burials or scattered remains of small skirmishes. Yet further excavation revealed a far more disturbing pattern. Hundreds of human bones, many showing clear signs of trauma, arrow wounds, cuts from swords and axes, and blunt force injuries, concentrated in a relatively small area. Radiocarbon dating places the event around 1250 BC, roughly coinciding with the final years of the Bronze Age collapse, yet the scale is almost unimaginable for the time. Estimates suggest that between 4,000 and 5,000 warriors may have taken part in the battle, far exceeding the populations of surrounding settlements. Many were young men, likely seasoned fighters, armed with bronze-tipped arrows, wooden clubs, and slings. Weapons were expertly crafted, some imported from distant regions, hinting at trade networks and interactions that extended far beyond northern Germany. But why would such a massive force converge on a single valley? What was at stake in this battle that warranted such an extraordinary mobilization of manpower? The archaeological record offers clues, but raises as many questions as it answers. Some bones show healed injuries, suggesting that combatants were experienced warriors accustomed to violence. Others appear to have been struck without warning, indicating ambush or chaos during battle. Animal remains found nearby suggest that groups were prepared to provision large forces, pointing to strategic planning rather than spontaneous conflict. Yet no fortifications, settlements, or nearby palaces indicate an obvious cause or political center. What drove these people to fight in such overwhelming numbers in this seemingly remote landscape? Mainstream theories suggest that the battle may have resulted from a conflict over territory, trade routes, or resources. The Tollense Valley sits near rivers that would have been vital arteries for communication and transport, linking communities across the region. Control of these routes could have been essential for survival, particularly in a period already marked by climate stress, famine, and societal disruption. Yet even this explanation struggles to capture the scale of the violence. Battles of this magnitude were rare in prehistory, and organizing thousands of fighters requires sophisticated leadership and coordination. Other ideas venture into the more speculative. Some researchers suggest that this conflict may have been part of larger migratory movements as displaced populations clashed with established communities. Could groups forced from other parts of Europe or even further afield have converged in the valley, resulting in an explosive confrontation? Others consider ritualized warfare or intertribal alliances collapsing into violent encounters. Yet in each case, the exact cause remains tantalizingly out of reach, obscured by the millennia that separate us from the scene. The Tollense Valley Massacre also raises questions about the nature of Bronze Age warfare itself. Evidence indicates that both sides employed sophisticated tactics, including coordinated archery and ambushes, suggesting that this was not a chaotic skirmish, but a carefully executed military engagement. How much of this knowledge was shared across Europe at the time? Did the warriors of Tollense fight with local strategies, or were they influenced by techniques from far-flung civilizations? The answers remain speculative, hinted at only by the scars preserved in bone. Equally haunting is the anonymity of the dead. Despite the scale of the massacre, no inscriptions, graves, or monuments mark their sacrifice. They lie scattered in the riverbed, stripped of identity, preserved only in the cold soil and peat. Their weapons and injuries tell fragments of the story, but who they were, why they fought, and what they hoped to achieve remain mysteries. In a sense, the valley itself becomes a tomb not just for the bodies, but for the historical narrative, leaving modern researchers to reconstruct events from shadows and fragments. The Tollense Valley also challenges assumptions about prehistoric Europe. We often imagine Bronze Age societies as small, localized, and relatively peaceful, with large-scale violence reserved for later periods. Yet here is evidence of an organized, large-scale battle, rivaling early historic conflicts in size and complexity. This discovery forces us to reconsider the social and political structures of the time. Were there regional powers capable of mobilizing thousands of fighters? Or were these extraordinary events arising from temporary coalitions, alliances of convenience, or even desperation in a destabilized world? Standing beside the Tollense River today, it is hard not to feel the weight of what happened. The grass rustles where thousands once clashed. The river flows over bones and weapons that tell only fragments of a story. And as we reflect on the Tollense Valley, we are reminded that history often preserves violence more clearly than purpose. The scale of this massacre, the skill of the combatants, and the total absence of written records make it one of prehistory's most enigmatic events. We are left with questions that may never be fully answered. What prompted such a clash in this otherwise quiet valley? Were the combatants part of larger migratory or political movements across Bronze Age Europe? And how many other battles of comparable scale have been lost to time, leaving no trace but whispers in the soil? As we continue to uncover the Tollense Valley, one thing becomes certain. The past is never entirely silent, yet it often speaks in riddles, leaving us to wonder what else lies hidden, waiting to be discovered beneath the earth. As we leave the shadowed battlefields of Tollense behind, our journey turns south and east, toward the lands that once formed the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire, a vast, rugged expanse of mountains, deserts, and river valleys, where history itself seems to fade into mystery. Here, along the borders of Mesopotamia and the Armenian highlands, a question has lingered for nearly 2 millennia. What became of the so-called lost Roman legion that vanished from the records, leaving only speculation and fragmentary traces in its wake? The story begins with Legio Nona Hispana, or in some accounts, Legio Duodecima Fulminata, stationed at the fringes of imperial control in the 1st century AD. Ancient historians record that during campaigns in the east, Roman forces advanced into territories that are today part of Iraq, Syria, and eastern Turkey. Letters, military logs, and inscriptions track their movements, until, suddenly, they stop. The legion disappears from official annals, and subsequent records make no clear mention of its fate. Rome, meticulous in documentation, left a silence that has haunted scholars for centuries. Archaeological finds add layers of intrigue. Fortifications along the Euphrates bear signs of Roman occupation, small forts, inscriptions carved into stone, and weapons left behind. But nothing explains a complete legion's disappearance. Could they have been overwhelmed in a single catastrophic engagement? Or did they succumb slowly, through attrition, disease, or starvation in harsh and unfamiliar lands? The evidence is tantalizing yet frustratingly incomplete, leaving a vacuum that invites both careful inquiry and imaginative speculation. Mainstream theories focus on known conflicts with Parthian or later Sasanian forces. Roman armies were engaged in repeated campaigns along the eastern frontier, facing highly organized opponents adept at cavalry warfare and terrain strategy. A disastrous battle could have annihilated a legion far from reinforcements, leaving few survivors to tell the tale. Yet the absence of contemporary Roman reports of such a loss is striking. If an entire legion had been destroyed, why would Rome's historians, so thorough in recording military triumphs and defeats, leave no explicit account? Some evidence hints at alternative explanations. A handful of inscriptions and coin hoards found east of the Tigris suggest that Roman soldiers may have been captured or assimilated into local societies. Could a legion, or fragments of it, have survived as mercenaries, integrated into Parthian or other regional armies? If so, the soldiers' legacy would have persisted in ways invisible to Roman chroniclers, leaving only traces of Roman discipline, equipment, or tactics in the armies of the East. Other, more speculative theories propose even stranger possibilities. Some researchers suggest the legion might have been sent on a covert campaign, perhaps to secure trade routes or suppress uprisings in remote regions, never to return to the empire. Others hint at climatic or environmental catastrophes, flooding along the Tigris or Euphrates, epidemics or famine, that could have decimated forces far from immediate support. Each hypothesis reflects the same core mystery: the fate of hundreds or thousands of soldiers vanished almost without a trace. There is also the question of memory and myth. Later legends, scattered across Armenian, Syrian, and Persian sources, speak of foreign soldiers, disciplined and armed, suddenly appearing in local conflicts. Could these be echoes of Roman troops who survived in small numbers, adapting to new circumstances, their identities transformed over time? Or are these stories coincidental, embellishments imposed on a past already blurred by centuries? The difficulty lies in separating what may be true from what history has romanticized or misremembered. Even material culture provides only hints. Weapons consistent with Roman design appear sporadically in excavations east of the Euphrates. Remnants of Roman-style fortifications suggest temporary occupation, or at least influence. Yet these fragments offer no coherent narrative. Did a legion disband in desperation, leaving pieces of their standard behind? Were they defeated and absorbed, leaving only their engineering skills and military knowledge behind as faint echoes? Or is it possible that the records we rely upon have simply been lost, destroyed in fires, wars, or the passage of time, obscuring the fate of one of Rome's finest units forever? What makes this mystery particularly compelling is the scale of its implications. A single legion represented not only hundreds of trained soldiers, but also sophisticated logistics, command structures, and supply networks. Its disappearance hints at vulnerabilities in an empire often assumed to be unshakable. If a force could vanish so completely in the East, it raises questions about the challenges Rome faced along its borders. Challenges rarely visible in the grandeur of capital cities or monumental triumphs. Standing today in the valleys and plateaus where the lost legion may have marched, one is struck by the vastness of the terrain. The rivers, mountains, and deserts that shaped the soldiers' fates seem indifferent to human ambition, swallowing entire legions as if they were whispers in the wind. And yet, traces remain: a fragment of armor, a rusted sword, an inscription half erased by time. These remnants remind us that history is often preserved in fragments, waiting for those patient enough to assemble the pieces. As we reflect on the lost Roman legion in the East, the mystery endures. What truly happened to these men? Were they destroyed, captured, or absorbed into foreign lands? Could their disappearance have influenced subsequent military and political decisions in the empire? And perhaps most provocatively, how many other chapters of history remain hidden, lost in deserts, forests, and rivers, waiting to challenge our understanding of the past? In contemplating the vanished legion, we confront the limits of recorded history, the fragility of human memory, and the enduring capacity of mystery to shape our perception of ancient events. The East holds its secrets tightly, and as we move forward through the corridors of time, we are reminded once more that the past is never fully known. It is always, at some level, a puzzle whose pieces remain scattered, waiting for discovery. As we leave behind the eastern frontiers of Rome and the mysteries of vanished legions, our journey turns to the sparkling waters of the Aegean Sea, where once thriving cities rose from fertile plains and rocky hillsides, alive with trade, art, and ceremony. Crete, an island of sunlight and shadow, harbors the remnants of a civilization that flourished for centuries, only to vanish so suddenly that even today, archaeologists struggle to explain the silence left behind. This is the Minoan world, a society of palaces, frescoes, and harbors, thriving around 2000 to 1450 BC, and then disappearing almost without a trace. Walking through the ruins of Catastrophe, one feels the weight of lost sophistication. Walls painted with vibrant depictions of bulls, dancers, and marine life suggest a culture deeply connected to ritual, symbolism, and commerce. Its architecture is sophisticated, multi-storied palaces with plumbing systems, storage magazines, and ceremonial spaces. Yet, despite this apparent prosperity, evidence shows that by the mid-2nd millennium BC, the Minoan civilization underwent a profound transformation, culminating in what can only be described as sudden silence. Palaces were abandoned or destroyed, urban centers declined, and the vibrant artistry that once adorned walls ceased. Mainstream explanations point first to natural disasters. Crete lies near tectonic fault lines and volcanic activity, most famously the eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 to 1500 BC. The eruption would have been cataclysmic, ash clouds blotting out the sun, tsunamis washing across coasts, and atmospheric changes affecting agriculture. Archaeological layers on Crete show ash deposits consistent with this event, alongside signs of structural damage to palaces and settlements. Could the eruption alone have been enough to topple a civilization so seemingly secure? Yet, many scholars believe that Thera was only one factor. Evidence of widespread fire damage, fortification in previously unfortified sites, and shifts in settlement patterns suggest that social and political upheaval may have played a role. Was there internal strife in the wake of disaster? Were rival factions vying for control in a destabilized society? Or did external pressures, from Mycenaean Greece for example, accelerate the decline, as neighboring powers sought to exploit Crete's weakened state? Trade, once a lifeline, may also have been disrupted. The Minoans maintained extensive maritime networks across the eastern Mediterranean, connecting Crete to Egypt, Palestine, Anatolia, and the Cyclades. Evidence of imported goods, including copper, gold, and luxury items, diminishes during the late stages of the civilization. Could these interruptions in commerce have undermined economic and social cohesion, leaving communities vulnerable to collapse? Speculative theories widen the lens further. Some suggest that climate change, perhaps a series of prolonged droughts, may have stressed agriculture and led to food shortages. Others point to disease outbreaks, epidemic events that could decimate populations already weakened by disaster or famine. There are even hypotheses that the sudden silence reflects a deliberate cultural transformation, a conscious shift away from palace-centered authority toward decentralized communities whose traces are more ephemeral in the archaeological record. The nature of the destruction also raises questions. Many palaces show evidence of burning, yet the distribution of damage is uneven. Some centers were leveled, while others appear to have been abandoned with little sign of violence. What caused this variation? Could it reflect a combination of forces, volcano, earthquake, social upheaval, and external invasion, acting at different intensities across the island? Or might it suggest that some centers were deliberately dismantled, their decline orchestrated by human decisions rather than natural disaster alone? Beyond the material record, the abrupt end of linear A script, used extensively for administrative and ritual purposes, adds to the mystery. Writing vanishes almost entirely after 1450 BC, replaced by linear B in Mycenaean-dominated sites. How much of this shift reflects conquest, assimilation, or cultural replacement? And what knowledge, myths, or rituals were lost forever as the Minoan's voice faded from the written record? The human dimension of this silence is perhaps the most haunting. The Minoans had created a world of aesthetic refinement, religious complexity, and maritime prowess. Yet within a few generations, their cities stood empty, their artwork ceased, and their language fell silent. How did a civilization, resilient enough to thrive for centuries, dissolve into obscurity so suddenly? Was it catastrophe alone, or a convergence of environmental, social, and political pressures that tipped the balance? As we walk among the ruins of Knossos or Phaistos, imagining the daily rhythms of Minoan life, the bustling marketplaces, ceremonial dances, and ships returning with goods from distant lands, we confront a profound paradox. The Minoans shaped a world visible in stone and pigment, yet left no account of their own decline. Their disappearance is a reminder that even societies appearing stable and sophisticated can vanish from history, leaving mysteries that echo across millennia. The sudden silence of the Minoan civilization invites us to consider the fragility of human achievement, the interplay of natural forces and human choices, and the limits of what can be reconstructed from material traces alone. It raises enduring questions. How do societies recover from catastrophic shocks? What role do external pressures versus internal dynamics play in collapse? And perhaps most poignantly, how much of our past remains obscured, its stories unspoken, waiting for discovery beneath ruins, ash, and soil? In contemplating Crete's vanished palaces, we sense the tension between presence and absence, between brilliance and disappearance. The Minoans speak to us not in words, but in walls, frescoes, and artifacts, leaving behind a silent challenge to read history not only in what survives, but also in what has been lost, and to wonder what other civilizations, brilliant and forgotten, await rediscovery beneath the sands of time. As we leave behind the sun-baked ruins of Crete and the vanished brilliance of the Minoans, our journey turns northward, across storm-tossed seas to a world of ice and isolation. Greenland. Here, in fjords carved by glaciers and valleys lined with snow and rock, a chapter of human history quietly fades into mystery. The disappearance of the Norse colonies established along the southwestern coast of the island. These settlements, founded around 985 AD, endured for centuries in one of the harshest environments humans have ever inhabited, only to vanish by the 15th century, leaving behind walls, turf houses, and scattered artifacts, and questions that remain unanswered. Picture the settlements at Brattahlid and Hvalsey, where grass and moss grow over stone foundations. In the 11th century, these were bustling communities, connected by trade routes stretching across the North Atlantic. Timber, iron, and luxury goods arrived from Iceland, Norway, and beyond, while walrus, ivory, and furs traveled south, fueling a network that linked Greenland to the wider medieval world. Archaeological evidence paints a picture of resilience. Houses designed to withstand bitter winters, grazing lands managed for livestock, and churches reflecting both faith and community cohesion. Yet the continuity of these settlements would not endure. Mainstream explanations for the Norse disappearance focus first on environmental challenges. Greenland's climate shifted dramatically during the onset of the Little Ice Age, around the 14th century. Winters became longer, summers shorter, and growing seasons increasingly unreliable. Crops failed, pastures shrank, and sea ice made maritime travel unpredictable. The Norse, heavily reliant on imported goods and livestock, may have found survival increasingly difficult, particularly as storms disrupted trade from Iceland and Europe. But if climate alone dictated their fate, why did some nearby Inuit populations adapt and endure in the same conditions? Social and economic factors add another layer of complexity. Greenlandic Norse society depended on maintaining contact with European markets. Declining demand for walrus ivory and increasing competition from other sources may have undermined trade networks, leaving settlements isolated. At the same time, internal dynamics, such as overgrazing, soil depletion, or limited population growth, may have reduced the colony's capacity to sustain themselves. Was it gradual attrition, a slow unraveling of social and economic structures that finally forced abandonment? Or did more sudden crises tip the balance? Evidence of violent conflict is sparse, yet not entirely absent. Skeletal remains show occasional injuries, though not on the scale of mass violence. Could tension with neighboring Inuit groups have contributed? Some scholars propose that interactions were largely peaceful, though competition over resources may have occasionally flared. Alternatively, the Norse may have succumbed largely to isolation, disease, and starvation, leaving little trace beyond empty houses and abandoned farms. Other, more speculative explanations linger at the edges of the historical record. Epidemics, smallpox, influenza, or other diseases introduced by contact with Europeans could have decimated the population, particularly if isolated and malnourished. Some suggest that social rigidity played a role. The Norse may have clung to familiar farming and herding practices ill-suited to a changing environment, failing to adopt techniques that the Inuit used successfully. Were these cultural choices a factor in their decline, as much as environmental pressures? Archaeological findings continue to surprise. Middens contain remnants of fish, seal, and whale, suggesting that Norse diets adapted over time to incorporate more marine resources. Yet these adjustments may have been insufficient to offset broader climatic and economic challenges. Some evidence hints at gradual migration away from the coast, toward smaller, dispersed farms or inland settlements, though records remain fragmentary. The process was likely uneven, punctuated by decades of struggle and adaptation, before the final silence descended. The narrative of disappearance is complicated further by historical texts. Written accounts from Iceland and Norway, including sagas and church records, allude to Greenland and its communities, but provide little concrete information about their ultimate fate. Letters describe voyages that never reached their destination, suggesting that sea ice and storms increasingly made travel perilous. The absence of contemporary eyewitness accounts leaves modern scholars piecing together a story from fragments of artifacts, environmental data, and traces left in the soil and ice. Standing in the abandoned settlements today, one is struck by the stark beauty and relentless challenge of the landscape. Turf walls crumble, paths fade beneath moss and snow, and the horizon is dominated by icebergs drifting silently in fjords. It is a world both harsh and fragile, where human endeavor persisted against formidable odds, only to disappear, leaving behind both material echoes and profound silence. The disappearance of the Norse Greenland colonies raises enduring questions. Was it primarily climate that forced their hand, or did a combination of economic isolation, social rigidity, and environmental stress converge to make survival impossible? Could disease or sporadic conflict have accelerated the process, tipping already vulnerable communities into decline? And perhaps most hauntingly, what stories, skills, and memories vanished with these people, leaving only the stone foundations of houses and the occasional artifact to speak across centuries? In contemplating Greenland's silent fjords and the vanished communities along its shores, we are reminded that human history is fragile, even when it seems robust. Societies can endure centuries in isolation, innovate to survive, and yet ultimately disappear, leaving behind mysteries that endure long after the last voices have faded. The Norse colonies of Greenland stand as a testament to resilience and adaptation, and to the enduring power of mystery, inviting us to wonder what else in our human past remains hidden, quietly waiting beneath ice, soil, and memory. So, as the icy fjords of Greenland fade behind us, we return to the fertile plains of Eastern Europe, where the echoes of vanished communities are written not in stone or frost, but in clay and char. Here lie the remnants of the Trypillia culture, flourishing between roughly 5,400 and 2,700 BC across what is now Ukraine, Moldova, and parts of Romania. Archaeologists have long marveled at their settlements, sprawling, densely packed communities, sometimes covering more than 300 hectares, arranged in concentric patterns with hundreds of buildings. These were the mega-settlements of prehistory, hubs of life, trade, and ritual, and yet, time and again, they burned. Walking among the remnants of these settlements, one is struck by their scale and complexity. Timber and clay houses sit in circular arrangements, interconnected by pathways that suggest careful planning. Pottery, painted with intricate spirals and geometric patterns, speaks to a culture both artistic and highly organized. Yet beneath this orderly exterior lies a puzzle. Layers of charcoal and ash, repeated across multiple generations, indicate that these settlements were deliberately set on fire, sometimes entirely, only to be rebuilt anew. The evidence of burning is indisputable. Excavations reveal entire neighborhoods reduced to ash, with ceramic vessels shattered in place, hearths blackened and floors scorched. Radiocarbon dating confirms that this pattern repeated over centuries. The question is profound. Why would communities, already immense and laboriously constructed, burn themselves, or be burned, so consistently? Mainstream explanations suggest practical reasons. Some propose accidental fires, densely packed wooden houses, combined with open flames for cooking and heating, could have made large fires inevitable. Yet the scale and recurrence of the burn layers challenge this notion. Fires often seem too systematic, affecting entire neighborhoods rather than spreading randomly, as one would expect from accidents. Another widely discussed theory involves ritual or symbolic purposes. The destruction may have been deliberate, an integral part of a cultural or religious cycle. Some scholars suggest that burning marked a generational transition, a renewal of the settlement that aligned with beliefs about life, death, and the community. Could these fires have been expressions of devotion, a controlled destruction meant to sustain social cohesion and spiritual continuity? Other hypotheses point to conflict. Could rival groups or internal disputes have prompted repeated attacks? While fortifications are largely absent, The occasional presence of defensive ditches or palisades hints that violence may have been a concern. Were these fires the result of invasions, or perhaps internal social tensions, erupting in ritualized or violent acts that left the settlements scorched? The archaeological record offers no definitive answer, leaving room for speculation. Environmental factors also come into play. The Trypillia culture thrived during periods of climate fluctuation. Changing rainfall patterns, soil depletion, or droughts could have stressed agricultural systems, forcing communities to abandon or intentionally destroy settlements in response to crisis. Could these repeated burnings have been a strategy to manage resources, to clear land for new construction, or to signal adaptive change in the face of environmental uncertainty? Speculative theories venture further. Some suggest that the repeated destruction reflects a deeper symbolic worldview, one in which life and death, creation and destruction, were intertwined in cycles represented physically in the landscape. Others imagine catastrophic external events, lightning strikes, epidemics, or even distant volcanic activity, sparking fires that were incorporated into cultural memory as ritual acts. Each hypothesis resonates with fragments of evidence, but ultimately leaves the full story unresolved. What makes the Trypillia phenomenon especially compelling is the sheer ambition of the settlements. Some megasites housed thousands of people, requiring sophisticated organization of food, labor, and social coordination. The decision to burn such a settlement, even partially, would have required communal agreement, or at least acquiescence. This suggests that the act of burning was not merely destructive, but deeply meaningful, embedded in the social fabric of the culture. The repetition of this pattern over centuries adds to the mystery. It is not a one-time event, but a recurring feature, hinting at a worldview in which destruction was a part of life, perhaps even necessary for continuity. How did these communities reconcile the labor, loss, and risk inherent in such acts? Were these fires a demonstration of power, faith, or resilience? Or do they reflect pressures that modern scholars struggle to reconstruct, embedded in choices that were as pragmatic as they were symbolic? Standing today amidst the ruins, one senses both ambition and impermanence. The ash-laden layers beneath our feet are testimony to human ingenuity, perseverance, and the enigmatic forces guiding social behavior in prehistory. They invite reflection on the cycles of growth and collapse, the interplay of environment, culture, and ritual, and the ways that communities choose to mark transitions, manage crises, or express identity. The repeated burning of Trypillia mega-settlements leaves us with enduring questions. Were these fires primarily accidental, ritualistic, strategic, or the result of conflict? Did they represent conscious cultural choices or responses to forces beyond human control? And more broadly, what can these charred layers tell us about human resilience, adaptation, and the ways societies navigate uncertainty? In contemplating the silent, ashen streets of Trypillia, we are reminded that human history is often written not only in construction and creation, but in deliberate destruction as well. The mystery endures, offering us glimpses of a culture both monumental and fragile, and inviting us to wonder what other cycles of rise, fall, and renewal remain hidden beneath the layers of time. As the smoke from the repeatedly burned Trypillia mega-settlements fades into memory, a deeper silence emerges across the same fertile plains of Eastern Europe. Stretching from the Carpathian Mountains to the Dniester River, the lands that once thrived under the Cucuteni Trypillia culture hold a lingering mystery, a civilization that flourished for millennia, only to vanish almost entirely by 2750 BC. These were people of extraordinary ingenuity, shaping enormous settlements, exquisite pottery, and intricate ritual spaces, and then, seemingly, leaving the world quiet, their traces buried beneath soil and time. Imagine walking along the rolling hills and river valleys of modern Ukraine, Moldova, and northeastern Romania, Beneath the grass lie the remnants of densely packed houses arranged in concentric patterns, some spanning hundreds of hectares. These were not mere villages, they were mega-settlements, home to thousands of people, connected by pathways, communal spaces, and possibly systems of governance we can only glimpse. Each household left behind painted ceramics, vessels adorned with spirals, meanders, and anthropomorphic motifs, telling of a culture deeply invested in artistic expression, symbolism, and daily ritual. Yet, despite their ingenuity, the Cucuteni Trypillia people disappear from the record, leaving questions that linger like shadows over the land. Archaeological evidence suggests that these communities practiced a highly organized form of agriculture, herding, and craft specialization. Mega-settlements were abandoned at intervals, sometimes burned in patterns that suggest ritual or systematic clearing, yet the ultimate disappearance of the culture was complete. The final settlements of the Cucuteni Trypillia people show signs of gradual depopulation, abandonment, and, in some cases, destruction. But there is no clear record of conquest or widespread external invasion. What forces could have brought such a thriving civilization to silence? Climate and environmental pressures appear to have played a role. Pollen data and sediment cores suggest shifts toward drier conditions in Eastern Europe around 3000 BC, potentially stressing agriculture and water supply. Could prolonged droughts, soil exhaustion, or other environmental stresses have undermined the food security of such large settlements? If so, how did communities attempt to adapt, and why did these adaptations ultimately fail to preserve the culture? Social and economic factors add further complexity. The Cucuteni Trypillia people relied on intricate networks of trade and communication, exchanging pottery, tools, and possibly ritual knowledge across vast distances. Disruption to these networks, through environmental change, migration of neighboring peoples, or internal instability, could have weakened the cohesion of their settlements. Could the abandonment of mega-settlements reflect a deliberate shift toward smaller, more sustainable communities rather than sudden catastrophe? Or did external pressures force a rapid collapse that left no time for adaptation? The question of ritual and culture also persists. Excavations reveal repeated burnings of structures, a practice echoed in the Trypillia settlements discussed earlier. Was this a form of ceremonial renewal, a symbolic act marking the end of generations? Or could it reflect stress, conflict, or even external attack? And if ritual played a role, how did it intersect with environmental and economic challenges to produce a final, enduring disappearance? Speculative theories expand the horizon of inquiry. Some researchers suggest migration as a possibility. Did groups of Cucuteni Trypillia people move westward, southward, or even northward, assimilating into other emerging cultures? Others propose that the culture may have been gradually absorbed into the corded ware or other contemporaneous populations, leaving traces in artifacts and practices but losing its distinct identity. Yet no definitive evidence confirms large-scale migration or assimilation, leaving the fate of these people tantalizingly uncertain. Material culture itself offers tantalizing hints and profound frustrations. Pottery styles evolve and disappear, figurines and symbolic objects vanish from the record, and settlements that once teemed with life are replaced by fallow land and the occasional layer of charcoal. Each layer invites speculation. Were these acts deliberate, catastrophic, or adaptive? How did people live in the final decades before their disappearance, and what choices were forced upon them by circumstance? The human element remains hauntingly present, yet frustratingly absent. Families that once gathered around hearths, communities that coordinated trade and ritual, children who learned to shape clay and tend livestock. All of these lives have been reduced to fragments of pottery, foundation stones, and soil chemistry. Archaeology can reconstruct structures and patterns, But the voices, thoughts, and intentions of the people themselves are largely lost. The vanishing of the Cucuteni Trypillia culture challenges assumptions about prehistoric societies. These were communities capable of extraordinary organization and artistic sophistication, yet their collapse demonstrates the fragility of human achievement when faced with environmental, social, or economic stressors, or some combination of the three. What made this disappearance irreversible, while other contemporaneous cultures endured or adapted? Standing today on the fields that once hosted bustling mega-settlements, it is easy to feel the tension between presence and absence. The land holds traces of a people whose ingenuity shaped complex communities, yet it also carries silence, hinting at a disappearance that remains unexplained. The mystery lingers in every fragment of painted pottery, every burned foundation, every layer of soil that holds a story just beyond reach. The disappearance of the Cucuteni Trypillia culture leaves us with enduring questions. Was it environmental collapse, social transformation, migration, or a combination of forces that ended this civilization? Did ritual or belief play a role in the timing or nature of settlement abandonment? And how much of their legacy might survive, hidden within other emerging cultures or simply lost to time? In contemplating the vanished cities of Cucuteni Trypillia, we are reminded that history often preserves the outlines of human life, but not its fullness. Civilizations can flourish, innovate, and vanish, leaving behind only echoes that invite curiosity, reflection, and wonder. The fields of Eastern Europe, still fertile yet quiet, hold both memory and mystery, prompting us to ask, what other stories of human brilliance, resilience, and disappearance remain buried, waiting for us to uncover their secrets? As we leave behind the vanished mega-settlements of Eastern Europe, our journey moves westward, across the Atlantic, to the rich floodplains of the Mississippi River in what is now the United States. Here, around the year 1050 AD, a city unlike any other in North America rose from the earth: Cahokia. Sprawling across hundreds of hectares near modern-day St. Louis, it became the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, home to tens of thousands of people, monumental mounds, and bustling plazas. And yet, by the early 14th century, this once thriving city was suddenly abandoned, leaving behind towering earthen mounds and empty fields that whisper of a civilization lost to time. Imagine standing before Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in the Americas, rising nearly 30 meters above the surrounding plain. From its summit, one can envision a bustling city. Wooden homes arranged along a network of streets, ceremonial plazas filled with people, and the clang of tools shaping copper, shell, and wood. Artifacts reveal a culture of remarkable sophistication: pottery, effigy pipes, ornaments, and tools crafted with skill and purpose. Cahokia was more than a settlement. It was the heart of a civilization, a hub of commerce, politics, and spiritual life. Yet beneath the soil lies a mystery. Why, after centuries of growth and achievement, did this city fall silent so abruptly? Archaeologists have long sought answers in environmental and climatic evidence. Studies of tree rings, sediment cores, and pollen suggest that Cahokia's decline coincided with periods of intense flooding along the Mississippi, as well as alternating droughts that would have stressed agriculture. Corn, the staple crop, may have failed in successive seasons, and the city's massive population could have become unsustainable without reliable food sources. But while environmental pressures certainly played a role, they alone cannot fully explain the sudden, comprehensive abandonment of such an organized urban center. Social and political factors add further complexity. Cahokia's power was rooted in hierarchical structures, with elites controlling trade, ritual, and agricultural distribution. Evidence suggests that social tensions may have emerged: densely packed populations, competition for resources, or disputes among elites could have destabilized the city. Could internal strife have weakened the cohesion necessary to maintain such a large urban network? Or did political decisions accelerate the exodus, as families and communities sought safety and sustainability elsewhere? Conflict may also have contributed. Archaeologists have found evidence of palisades, defensive ditches, and signs of fortification, indicating that the city faced threats, possibly from rival groups or neighboring communities. Were these defenses responses to violent incursions, or proactive measures anticipating environmental stress and internal unrest? If conflict played a role, how extensive was it? And how did it intersect with the other pressures facing Cahokia? Speculative theories widen the lens further. Some suggest that disease may have spread through the dense population, weakening social structures and forcing people to flee. Others propose ritual or cosmological reasons, linking the city's decline to cycles of ceremonial significance, or suggesting that spiritual upheaval coincided with environmental or social instability. And then there is the question of migration. Did displaced populations leave to join other communities, blending into new settlements while leaving Cahokia itself behind? Material evidence offers both clues and frustrations. Layers of abandoned homes, broken pottery, and scattered tools reveal signs of hurried departure in some areas. Yet in others, the city seems to have been vacated gradually, over decades. The streets once filled with life now lie quiet, and the enormous mounds, symbols of collective labor and faith, stand like silent sentinels over a landscape of absence. How did the inhabitants perceive their own decline? Were they fleeing catastrophe, responding to social breakdown, or making a conscious decision to abandon the city they had built? Cahokia's sudden silence challenges assumptions about pre-Columbian urbanism in North America. It forces us to reconsider the dynamics of large-scale societies outside the Old World, and to recognize the fragile balance between human innovation, environmental conditions, and social cohesion. The city's abandonment illustrates how a civilization can reach remarkable heights and yet disappear with little trace of its decision-making, leaving only the earthworks, artifacts, and faint traces of streets for modern observers to interpret. Standing on the grassy plains that once hosted thousands, one feels the tension between presence and absence. The sun casts long shadows across mounds that are both enduring and silent, testifying to human ambition while concealing its final fate. The Mississippi winds through the valley as it did centuries ago, indifferent to the rise and fall of the city along its banks. And yet, these remnants speak in fragments and impressions of life, labor, belief, and mystery. The sudden abandonment of Cahokia invites reflection on enduring questions. Was it environmental catastrophe, social collapse, conflict, disease, or some combination that led to its depopulation? Did the city's decline happen abruptly, or was it a drawn-out process of attrition and adaptation? And beyond these practical considerations, what human choices and experiences, fear, hope, ritual, and resilience, shaped the final chapter of a city that once stood as a beacon of pre-Columbian achievement? In contemplating Cahokia today, we confront the fragility and complexity of human societies. The mounds, plazas, and artifacts offer glimpses into a civilization that mastered urban planning, craft, and ritual, yet ultimately vanished from its own land. As with many of the mysteries explored in this journey, the story of Cahokia reminds us that history preserves both presence and absence, leaving us to wonder what other lost cities, hidden cultures, and vanished civilizations await rediscovery beneath the soil, waiting to speak across centuries. As we step away from the earthen mounds of North America, our journey takes us back across the Atlantic and through time to the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia, where the Euphrates and Tigris rivers converge in a fertile but fragile landscape. Here, around 2334 BC, a power emerged that would unify city-states under a single banner. The Akkadian Empire. Founded by Sargon of Akkad, it became the world's first known empire, stretching across vast territories, integrating diverse peoples, and establishing unprecedented administrative and cultural systems. And yet, barely 2 centuries later, this remarkable civilization collapsed, leaving cities abandoned, trade disrupted, and a land scarred by desolation. Imagine the ziggurats of Akkad and Nippur rising above sun-baked streets, the bustle of markets echoing with the voices of traders, scribes, and artisans. Palaces gleamed with mud brick precision, and temples reached skyward, offering sacrifices to gods that promised protection and order. Administrative tablets recorded laws, trade, and tribute, reflecting a society both sophisticated and interconnected. From a distance, the empire seemed unassailable, a model of early political organization. Yet beneath this apparent stability, forces were already brewing that would unravel Sargon's vision and bring the empire to ruin. Archaeological and paleo-environmental evidence points first to the environment. Studies of soil layers, pollen, and river deposits suggest that the Akkadian heartland faced severe and prolonged droughts around 2200 BC. Crops failed across wide areas, rivers dried or shifted course, and irrigation systems became difficult, if not impossible, to maintain. How could an empire so dependent on agriculture, tribute, and trade survive when its lifeblood, the land itself, turned against it? These ecological pressures may have strained food production, undermined urban centers, and forced populations to migrate in search of sustenance. Yet environmental stress alone does not fully explain the collapse. Social, political, and economic dynamics likely exacerbated the crisis. The Akkadian Empire relied on a network of governors and local elites to maintain control over its vast territories. If environmental pressures weakened central authority, how quickly could unrest, rebellion, or breakdown in governance emerge? Could internal disputes, combined with declining resources, have accelerated the empire's disintegration, turning once loyal city-states into autonomous or hostile regions? Evidence of violence appears intermittently in the archaeological record. Burn layers, fortifications, and traces of conflict hint that some cities experienced raids or warfare. Were these attacks opportunistic, targeting weakened settlements, or part of a larger, coordinated series of invasions? And if conflict played a role, who were the aggressors? Neighboring peoples taking advantage of the empire's vulnerability, or internal factions challenging central authority? The answers remain elusive, buried beneath layers of earth and the silence of time. Speculative theories expand the picture even further. Some scholars suggest that a combination of climate, social strain, and disease may have converged in a perfect storm, overwhelming both human and natural systems. Could epidemic outbreaks have decimated urban populations already weakened by hunger, contributing to the abandonment of cities? Others propose that the collapse was cyclical, part of a broader pattern in early Mesopotamian history, where centralized authority rises rapidly and falls just as suddenly in response to environmental and social stresses. The Akkadian collapse also invites questions about the fragility of human networks. Trade routes crisscrossing the Fertile Crescent were disrupted. Tin, copper, and other critical materials for tools and weapons became scarce. Communication between cities faltered. In an empire that relied on coordination, the failure of logistics may have compounded the effects of environmental stress and political instability. How much of the empire's downfall was due to human mismanagement, and how much to forces beyond human control? Standing amid the ruins of Mesopotamian cities today, one senses both grandeur and loss. Walls and foundations hint at organized urban life, while desiccated canals and riverbeds testify to the fragility of human endeavor against nature's rhythms. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire illustrates a paradox. A civilization capable of unprecedented centralization, military prowess, and cultural achievement could nonetheless be undone by forces that are, in some ways, universal: climate, resource scarcity, social tension, and the unpredictability of human response. The mystery deepens when we consider the speed of the collapse. Some cities show evidence of rapid abandonment, while others seem to have persisted in a weakened state before eventually disappearing. How did populations decide when to leave and where to go? Were these migrations planned, desperate, or fragmented? And what cultural, religious, or social knowledge was lost as administrative centers fell silent and once thriving communities dispersed into smaller, more isolated groups? The collapse of the Akkadian Empire invites reflection on the interplay of human ambition and environmental fragility. How do complex societies manage the tension between expansion, resource limits, and ecological vulnerability? Could lessons from Akkad resonate even today, reminding us that even the most powerful systems can falter when critical thresholds are crossed? As we look across the plains and riverbeds of Mesopotamia, now quiet except for the whisper of the wind through abandoned brick and stone, the Akkadian Empire speaks in fragments, tablets, ruins, and traces of canals. It tells of ambition and ingenuity, of unprecedented reach and control, and yet of impermanence and vulnerability. Its collapse remains partially obscured, a puzzle of climate, politics, social dynamics, and human decision-making. And as with so many mysteries we have explored, it leaves us to wonder, what truths lie hidden beneath the layers of time, waiting to illuminate not only the past, but the patterns of human societies that endure to this day? As the dust of Mesopotamia settles and the echoes of the Akkadian Empire's collapse fade, our journey turns southwest, to the sun-baked banks of the Nile River, where one of humanity's earliest monumental civilizations rose with astonishing precision and scale. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, stretching from roughly 2686 to 2181 BC, produced the iconic pyramids of Giza, vast necropolises, and an enduring cultural legacy. Yet beneath this veneer of stability and grandeur, evidence suggests that an extraordinary, largely unrecorded climate event may have struck, reshaping society in ways that left few direct traces in the historical record. Picture the Nile Valley in its prime, fertile floodplains stretching between desert cliffs, inundated each year by predictable, life-giving waters. Farmers tilled rich silt, feeding cities and supplying the labor needed for pyramid construction. Pharaohs ruled with divine authority, overseeing vast bureaucracies, temple complexes, and monumental projects that celebrated both their power and cosmic order. Yet somewhere within the final centuries of the Old Kingdom, this carefully balanced world began to falter. Inscriptions and administrative records hint at unrest, famines, and a decline in central authority. But the precise catalyst remains enigmatic. Could an unrecorded climate shock, hidden in sediment layers and tree rings, have disrupted the Nile's rhythms and set in motion the fracturing of a civilization? Hydrological and geological studies provide tantalizing clues. Core samples from the Nile Delta reveal anomalies in sediment deposition consistent with severe drought or irregular flooding during the late Old Kingdom. Tree ring data from regions connected to Egypt's trade networks suggest extended dry periods that would have affected grain production, livestock, and water availability. If the Nile's inundations faltered, how would a society so dependent on its cycles have coped? Could famine have sparked social unrest, migrations from the Delta to Upper Egypt, or weakened the pharaoh's ability to maintain centralized control? Archaeological evidence underscores a period of societal stress. Provincial governors, once under tight control of the central administration, began building more autonomous administrative centers. Tombs show variations in size and quality, hinting at shifts in wealth distribution and local power. Urban centers in some regions shrink, while smaller settlements persist, suggesting that communities adapted or relocated in response to environmental pressures. How much of this restructuring was a natural adaptation to ecological stress, and how much reflected political fragmentation that would eventually culminate in the First Intermediate Period? Speculative theories expand the picture further. Some researchers suggest that the climate shock may have coincided with disease outbreaks, compounding the effects of food shortages. Others propose that Nile flow disruption may have been cyclic, part of longer-term climatic oscillations that periodically tested the resilience of the Old Kingdom. Could a combination of ecological and social stressors, drought, famine, epidemic, political strain, have created a perfect storm, hastening the decline of a society that otherwise seemed unshakable? The lack of explicit contemporary records documenting famine or environmental catastrophe adds to the mystery. Egyptian scribes were meticulous chroniclers, yet references to large-scale droughts or widespread famine are rare. Does this absence reflect deliberate omission, a cultural reluctance to record failure, or simply the limitations of surviving records? And if such a climate shock occurred, how might it have influenced the religious and political imagination of the Egyptians, who associated the pharaoh's divine mandate with cosmic and environmental stability? Material culture offers subtle hints. Variations in pyramid construction methods, reductions in labor-intensive projects, and changes in administrative seals and record-keeping practices suggest that central authority was increasingly challenged. Food storage facilities show evidence of adaptive strategies, including expanded granaries and local reservoirs, indicating that communities were attempting to buffer against environmental instability. Were these measures sufficient to sustain society, or were they stopgap responses that only delayed a broader collapse? The human experience of this unrecorded climate shock is hauntingly invisible. Families dependent on predictable floods may have faced crop failure, malnutrition, and social disruption. Communities accustomed to central coordination may have struggled to maintain local governance and ritual obligations. The pharaoh's divine image, tied to the Nile's reliability, could have been undermined in subtle but profound ways. How did ordinary Egyptians interpret these changes? Did they attribute them to divine displeasure, human failure, or some incomprehensible force? Standing along the Nile today, with its meandering channels and sunlit fields, it is difficult to imagine the vulnerability of the Old Kingdom to sudden environmental stress. Yet the archaeological and climatic record suggests a society delicately balanced upon ecological rhythms. When those rhythms faltered, the consequences were profound. Administrative fragmentation, social unrest, and eventually the political disintegration that ushered in the First Intermediate Period. The unrecorded climate shock of the Old Kingdom invites reflection on the interplay between environment and human civilization. How resilient can even highly organized societies be when dependent on a single ecological system? To what extent can central authority buffer environmental extremes, and when does adaptation give way to collapse? And perhaps most hauntingly, how many other civilizations have faced similar invisible forces, leaving only fragmentary traces for us to interpret centuries later? In contemplating the silent Nile, the abandoned granaries, and the unfinished monuments of the late Old Kingdom, we encounter a civilization at the mercy of unseen forces, challenged by drought and uncertainty, yet striving to maintain order and continuity. The mystery endures, echoing through layers of sediment, tree rings, and ruins, reminding us that even the greatest achievements are vulnerable to nature's quiet, inexorable rhythms, and inviting us to wonder what other unrecorded shocks have shaped human history, waiting patiently beneath the soil and sand to reveal their secrets. As the Nile's quiet waters recede into memory, our journey turns eastward, to to the fertile plains and winding rivers of the Indus Valley, where one of the world's earliest urban civilizations emerged nearly 5 millennia ago. Stretching across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, the Indus civilization, also called Harappan, built sprawling cities such as Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Dholavira, remarkable for their urban planning, sophisticated drainage systems, and standardized weights and measures. Yet, amid this evidence of organization and ingenuity lies one of history's most enduring mysteries: the disappearance of the Indus script, a written language that flourished across the region only to vanish without trace by around 1900 BC. Walking through the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, one is struck by the precision of its streets and houses, aligned with remarkable geometric regularity. Central granaries and marketplaces speak to coordinated urban management, while carefully crafted seals bear inscriptions of symbols, most famously the enigmatic Indus script. These symbols, etched on clay, stone, and metal, appear in repeating patterns, suggesting a complex system of communication, possibly used for trade, administration, and ritual. Yet, despite thousands of recovered inscriptions, the script has never been definitively deciphered. What messages, contracts, or ideas were encoded in these tiny, meticulous carvings? And why did this system of writing disappear entirely when the civilization itself began to decline? Archaeological evidence points to multiple pressures on Harappan society in the later stages of the civilization. Environmental studies reveal changing river courses, drying tributaries, and shifting monsoon patterns, which likely disrupted agriculture and trade. Cities dependent on reliable water sources may have faced declining crop yields, population stress, and the need to relocate. Could such environmental challenges have weakened the social structures that sustained the use of the Indus script, rendering it obsolete or unusable in the surviving communities? At the same time, trade networks that connected the Indus civilization to Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf, and beyond began to falter. Artifacts of Harappan origin, including seals and beads, are less commonly found in Mesopotamian contexts after 1900 BC, suggesting that long-distance exchange was declining. If communication with foreign centers diminished, might this have reduced the practical utility of writing systems like the Indus script, accelerating its disappearance? Speculative theories offer further possibilities. Some scholars suggest that migration or population movement could have dispersed literate communities, leaving rural populations with fewer opportunities or needs for written communication. Others posit that internal socio-political shifts, changes in elite structures, religious practices, or economic organization may have deprioritized the use of formal script. Was the Indus script abandoned as part of a cultural transformation? A conscious choice rather than a mere casualty of collapse? The very nature of the script adds to its mystery. Unlike contemporary writing systems in Mesopotamia or Egypt, which often preserve historical events, rulers' achievements, or religious texts, Indus inscriptions are almost always brief, typically a few characters long. Their brevity frustrates attempts at decipherment and suggests a function quite different from narrative storytelling. Could the script have served primarily administrative, ritual, or symbolic purposes? And if so, how did those functions change or disappear when society reorganized in the face of environmental and social pressures? Material culture provides subtle clues. Standardized weights, bricks, and pottery styles continue to be found even as inscriptions vanish, indicating continuity in some technical and craft practices. Yet the absence of writing marks a profound cultural shift. How did communities maintain trade, governance, and ritual practice without the inscriptions that had once encoded them? Did knowledge of the script survive orally, or was it lost entirely within a generation or two? The human element of this disappearance is hauntingly invisible. Merchants, artisans, and administrators who once used these seals daily, who recorded transactions, identified ownership, and perhaps invoked divine protection, vanished into a world without their familiar system of symbols. How did people adapt to life without writing? And what stories, prayers, or agreements were lost in that transition? Unlike collapses that leave dramatic destruction or conflict, the vanishing of the Indus script is subtle yet profound, an erasure not of walls or tools, but of human expression itself. Standing amidst the orderly streets and carefully aligned houses of Harappan cities today, one is struck by this duality, evidence of highly organized urban life alongside the profound silence of lost communication. The disappearance of the Indus script is a reminder that human knowledge is fragile, easily extinguished even when society continues in other ways. It also underscores the limits of archaeology. While we can uncover cities, artifacts, and streets, the meaning of symbols, the content of thought, and the voices of a vanished people may remain forever beyond reach. The mystery of the Indus script invites reflection on broader questions. What cultural, environmental, and social factors determine whether a writing system survives or vanishes? How did the people of the Indus Valley negotiate knowledge and memory in the absence of script? And more broadly, what fragments of human experience have been lost in other civilizations, leaving only material traces to speak across millennia? As we gaze upon the sun-baked ruins of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the tiny inscriptions on clay seals seem to whisper from across time, offering glimpses of a literate, sophisticated society whose words have been silenced. The disappearance of the Indus script remains one of history's most enigmatic puzzles, a reminder that human achievement, no matter how intricate or widespread, can vanish without warning. And in that silence lies a profound invitation to imagine the lives, thoughts, and stories of a people who left behind cities and artifacts, but whose words have, for now, disappeared into the sands of time. As the Indus Valley falls silent and its vanished script lingers only in fragments of clay and memory, our journey turns westward once more, toward the rugged highlands and fertile lowlands of what is now southwestern Iran, where the Elamite civilization thrived for millennia. Emerging as early as 3200 BC and enduring in various forms until roughly 539 BC, Elam was a land of mountains, rivers, and strategic crossroads, bridging Mesopotamia and the Iranian plateau. Cities such as Susa, Anshan, and Shimashki became hubs of culture, administration, and trade. Yet despite its resilience and adaptability, Elam ultimately collapsed, leaving behind ruins, inscriptions, and tantalizing mysteries about the forces that brought one of the ancient Near East's enduring powers to an end. Picture Susa in its height. Grand palaces built of mud brick, ceremonial temples adorned with glazed brick reliefs, streets bustling with merchants and scribes. Administrative tablets record trade, diplomacy, and law, while artifacts from distant lands, copper, lapis lazuli, and exotic ceramics, reflect a civilization enmeshed in regional networks. Elam was not merely a neighbor of Mesopotamian powers like Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. It was a culture with its own language, art, and political structures, able to withstand invasions and adapt across centuries. And yet, as we trace the archaeological layers forward in time, a pattern emerges. Cities abandoned, palaces burned, and inscriptions that fade, hinting at a decline that remains shrouded in uncertainty. Environmental evidence offers the first hints of strain. Sediment analysis, isotopic studies, and paleoclimatic data suggest periods of prolonged drought and river course changes in the region, which could have disrupted agriculture, diminished water access, and stressed urban populations. Elam's survival relied on irrigation and fertile floodplains, but shifts in rainfall and river flow could have undermined food security, leaving cities vulnerable to internal and external pressures. Could nature itself, in the form of shifting climate and ecological stress, have set the stage for a civilization's decline? Political and social factors likely compounded these challenges. Elam was frequently caught between powerful neighbors: Mesopotamian empires to the west, nomadic groups from the Iranian plateau, and emerging powers across the Zagros Mountains. Conflicts, shifting alliances, and periodic conquests may have weakened the state, while internal dynamics, succession disputes, social unrest, or economic strain could have eroded cohesion from within. How did Elamite rulers balance diplomacy, warfare, and administration across centuries? And what circumstances tipped the scales toward collapse? Archaeological layers reveal signs of destruction, including burned palaces and scattered artifacts, yet the pattern is irregular. Some cities were abandoned gradually, while others show evidence of sudden disruption. Were these the result of external invasion, internal rebellion, or the slow disintegration of centralized control under environmental stress? The evidence suggests a combination, but the exact sequence and magnitude of these events remain unclear. Speculative theories add further nuance. Could disease have contributed to depopulation, compounding famine and social instability? Did Elamite communities migrate to safer or more sustainable regions, blending with other populations while leaving their urban centers behind? Some scholars argue that cultural transformation, rather than outright destruction, may explain certain gaps. Administrative systems, language use, and ceremonial practices may have shifted in ways that left fewer durable traces, masking a slow but profound societal transformation as collapse. Material culture provides both guidance and frustration. Elamite art, inscriptions, and ceramics persist through centuries, reflecting continuity even amid stress. Yet the ultimate disappearance of some cities, along with gaps in administrative records, underscores the limits of our understanding. How did ordinary Elamites experience these final centuries? Did families abandon homes gradually in search of water and fertile land, or were they swept away by conflict or catastrophe? And what knowledge, rituals, and governance practices were lost as urban life dissipated? Standing in the ruins of Susa or Anshan today, one senses the tension between endurance and fragility. Mud brick walls crumble, inscriptions fade, and the once thriving streets are reclaimed by the desert and the hills. Elam's history reminds us that even civilizations capable of surviving neighboring empires, integrating trade networks, and enduring centuries of environmental change remain vulnerable to a combination of stressors that can dismantle urban life, political authority, and cultural continuity. The collapse of Elam raises profound questions. Was the civilization undone primarily by environmental shifts, or were social and political factors decisive? Did external invasions accelerate what may have already been a gradual decline? How did local populations respond, adapt, or migrate in the face of uncertainty? And beyond the material evidence, what human stories of resilience, decision, and loss have vanished alongside the cities themselves? In reflecting on Elam's decline, we are reminded that human societies are both remarkably resilient and surprisingly fragile. Trade, diplomacy, and infrastructure can sustain civilizations across centuries. Yet a confluence of environmental, political, and social forces can undermine even the most enduring systems. The ruins, artifacts, and inscriptions that survive speak to a people of ingenuity, adaptation, and complexity. Yet they also whisper of silence, absence, and questions that persist unanswered. The disappearance of Elam, like so many of the mysteries explored on this journey, invites contemplation of the delicate balance that sustains civilizations. Across deserts, rivers, and mountains, The remnants of palaces, administrative tablets, and ceramics stand as silent witnesses. They remind us that history is not only the story of power and construction, but also of disappearance, adaptation, and loss, and that even the most enduring empires may fade, leaving only traces for us to uncover and mysteries that continue to beckon across the centuries. As the deserts and ruins of Elam fade behind us, our journey shifts southward across the African continent to the rolling hills and granite outcrops of modern Zimbabwe. Here, between the 11th and 15th centuries A.D., one of Africa's most extraordinary civilizations rose in the form of Great Zimbabwe, a city of stone, power, and enduring enigma. Towering walls, intricately constructed without mortar, spiral across hills and valleys, enclosing complexes that served as royal residences, religious centers, and hubs of trade. Yet, by the late 15th century, this remarkable city was abandoned, leaving behind monumental stone structures that stand silent, prompting one of history's most enduring questions. Why did Great Zimbabwe fall into emptiness, its population dispersed, and its streets quiet? Imagine walking among the Great Enclosure, the largest stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa, its walls rising nearly 11 meters high, curved with precision over a vast area of granite boulders. Within these walls, courtyards and platforms once teemed with life, markets buzzing with traders exchanging gold, ivory, and exotic goods from across the Indian Ocean, artisans shaping intricate ornaments and tools, priests and rulers performing rituals that bound spiritual and political power together. The sheer scale and sophistication of construction speak to a society of remarkable organization, labor coordination, and wealth. Yet, all of this achievement vanished, leaving behind only stones, artifacts, and the tantalizing traces of a once thriving civilization. Archaeological evidence suggests that environmental factors may have played a role in Great Zimbabwe's decline. Pollen studies, sediment cores, and isotopic analysis indicate periods of prolonged drought during the 14th and 15th centuries. Water sources may have diminished, crops could have failed, and grazing lands for livestock may have been exhausted by overuse. Could a combination of climate stressors have undermined the city's ability to feed its population, forcing inhabitants to migrate in search of more sustainable lands? If so, how did these environmental challenges intersect with the social and political structures that had sustained the city for centuries? Social dynamics likely compounded these pressures. Great Zimbabwe was not a monolithic entity, but a complex network of elites, craftsmen, traders, and commoners. Political authority rested on the king and associated elites, whose control depended on wealth derived from trade and tribute. Evidence of population shifts, changes in construction quality, and modifications in urban planning suggest that internal governance may have been strained as environmental and economic pressures mounted. Could disputes among elites or declining central authority have accelerated the city's abandonment? And how did ordinary citizens navigate the growing instability in daily life? Trade networks, crucial to the city's prosperity, also show signs of disruption. Great Zimbabwe was linked to the Swahili coast, India, and even China through trade in gold, ivory, and other valuable goods. Archaeological finds of Chinese porcelain, imported beads, and coins indicate a cosmopolitan connection that bolstered wealth and influence. Yet, as environmental stress and regional conflicts increased, these trade routes may have faltered. Could the interruption of commerce have eroded the economic foundation of the city, making its continued occupation untenable? Speculative theories offer additional layers to the mystery. Some scholars suggest that cultural or religious shifts may have prompted a conscious decision to abandon certain sections of the city. Others propose that disease or epidemic could have reduced the population, forcing the city's slow depopulation. There is also the possibility of external conflict, raids, or pressures from neighboring states, compounding the internal vulnerabilities created by environmental and economic stress. Yet, despite centuries of study, no single factor explains the city's sudden silence. Material culture provides tantalizing hints. Pottery fragments, beads, iron tools, and gold ornaments reveal continuity in craft and trade, even as habitation patterns changed. Yet, within a generation, the monumental stone walls were left empty, the streets untraveled, and the plazas quiet. How did communities perceive their own decline? Were families fleeing gradually, seeking safety and resources elsewhere? Or were they forced to abandon the city abruptly? And what knowledge, technological, religious, or administrative, was lost as Great Zimbabwe fell silent? Standing today among the granite towers and winding walls, one senses both permanence and fragility. The stones endure, weathering centuries of sun, rain, and wind, yet the life that once animated them is gone. Great Zimbabwe exemplifies a paradox familiar in many ancient civilizations. Monumental achievement, economic and social sophistication, and regional influence can coexist with vulnerability to environmental shifts, political challenges, and the unpredictability of human choice. The disappearance of Great Zimbabwe invites reflection on broader questions. How do complex societies respond to ecological, economic, and social pressures? To what extent can centralized authority maintain cohesion under environmental stress? And how much of history is lost not through conquest or destruction, but through migration, adaptation, or the quiet dispersal of communities? In contemplating the empty stone courtyards, the intricately stacked walls, and the silent terraces of Great Zimbabwe, we confront a civilization that rose with grandeur and ingenuity, yet vanished in ways that continue to puzzle historians, archaeologists, and visitors alike. The mystery of its abandonment reminds us that human societies, no matter how powerful or sophisticated, remain at the mercy of forces both seen and unseen. And within that silence lies an invitation to wonder, to search, and to imagine the lives, decisions, and circumstances that shaped the rise and quiet disappearance of one of Africa's most remarkable civilizations. As the grandeur of Great Zimbabwe fades into the distance, our journey takes us northward, deep into the desert expanses of what is now southern Egypt. Here, long before the construction of pyramids and pharaonic tombs, human communities were leaving traces of remarkable ingenuity amid a harsh and unforgiving landscape. Nabta Playa, a remote basin in the Nubian desert, offers one of the earliest glimpses of organized human life in northeastern Africa, dating back to around 7,500 BC. At its height, this site became a center of ritual, astronomy, and settlement, its stone circles and alignments standing as silent witnesses to human curiosity, social organization, and spiritual life. And yet, like so many ancient cultures we have explored, the Nabta Playa culture eventually vanished, leaving behind questions that have puzzled archaeologists, historians, and astronomers for decades. Picture the basin itself, a shallow depression surrounded by rocky hills, open to the vast expanse of desert, yet once nourished by seasonal rains that created temporary lakes and allowed for the growth of grasslands. Early pastoralists and hunter-gatherers established camps along these fertile patches, gradually organizing themselves into semi-permanent settlements. Stone circles, megalithic alignments, and carefully arranged megaliths mark their presence, their purpose shrouded in mystery. Some stones seem aligned with the solstices and other celestial events, suggesting an early form of astronomical observation, while others appear to have been used for ceremonial or ritual purposes. How did these people, living in such a harsh environment, develop the knowledge, skills, and social cohesion to create such enduring monuments? Archaeological evidence shows that Nabta Playa's inhabitants were sophisticated pastoralists. Cattle were central to their economy, both as a food source and as a symbol of wealth and social status. Pottery fragments, stone tools, and hearths reveal patterns of daily life, while ceremonial spaces hint at complex social structures and spiritual beliefs. The creation of stone circles, some with diameters of over 10 meters, required cooperation, planning, and shared purpose, suggesting a level of social organization rarely attributed to early Holocene communities. Yet, by around 3500 BC, these settlements were largely abandoned. What caused these people, so adept at living in the desert and shaping their environment, to leave the very lands they had carefully cultivated and ritualized? Environmental change is one likely factor. Paleoclimatic studies indicate that during the late Holocene, the region experienced gradual aridification with decreasing rainfall and shrinking water sources. Seasonal lakes that once supported grazing and human habitation dried up, reducing the viability of cattle herding and other subsistence strategies. Could the gradual desiccation of the desert have undermined the delicate balance that sustained Nabta Playa's communities, forcing migrations to more hospitable lands along the Nile or into the surrounding savannas? How quickly did these changes occur, and how did they interact with social and ritual life in the basin? Yet environmental explanations alone cannot capture the full mystery. The stone circles, alignments, and ceremonial constructions are so deliberate and culturally rich that their sudden abandonment suggests more than merely a response to drought. Could social reorganization, shifts in trade or cultural networks, or changes in ritual practice have influenced the decision to leave? Did new religious or political paradigms emerge elsewhere, drawing populations away from this once important ceremonial center? Speculative theories push the boundaries of conventional interpretation. Some researchers have suggested astronomical knowledge embedded in the alignments may have played a role in community cohesion or seasonal planning. If so, did changes in climate or celestial observations influence ritual life, and could shifts in belief systems have contributed to the site's abandonment? Others propose that external pressures, competition with neighboring groups, or conflict over limited resources may have accelerated migration. Yet evidence for violent conflict is scarce, leaving these theories tantalizing but unconfirmed. Material culture offers both insight and frustration. Pottery, lithic tools, and animal remains demonstrate continuity in everyday life, while ceremonial constructions reveal ingenuity and cosmological awareness. Yet after abandonment, the site was largely reclaimed by the desert, preserving only stone and a few durable artifacts. The traces of human presence that remain speak to a society that valued ritual, observation, and community, yet offer few clues about why these practices and their creators disappeared from the basin. How did knowledge, skills, and social memory survive, or fail to survive, once the people moved on? The human dimension of this disappearance is especially poignant. The people of Nabta Playa were not simply passive victims of environmental change. They were innovators, planners, and observers, capable of monumental construction and coordinated social action. Their departure represents not just a loss of settlement, but a shift in cultural and spiritual life. Did they carry their rituals and astronomical knowledge to other regions, influencing subsequent cultures along the Nile? Or did much of this understanding vanish with the abandonment of the site? And if knowledge was preserved elsewhere, how much was altered or transformed in its new context? Standing in the basin today, one is struck by the contrast between permanence and impermanence. The stone circles and alignments endure, silent witnesses to human curiosity and determination. The desert wind sweeps across the plains, erasing traces of habitation, and yet the stones remain, hinting at rituals, observations, and social structures that shaped lives for generations. The vanishing of Nabta Playa reminds us that human history is not only a story of survival and achievement, but also of disappearance, adaptation, and transformation. The mystery invites reflection on the broader patterns of human civilization. How do communities respond to environmental stress while maintaining social cohesion and cultural identity? To what extent can rituals, astronomy, and material culture buffer societies against climate change and ecological uncertainty? And crucially, what is lost when a society abandons its homeland, leaving behind structures that outlast the living memory of the people who built them? The vanishing of the Nabta Playa culture leaves us with a haunting question. What stories, knowledge, and practices disappeared with the people who once walked these plains, raised their stones, and observed the heavens? And how might these early innovators have shaped the trajectory of civilizations that followed along the Nile and across northeastern Africa? As the sun sets over the stone circles, casting long shadows across the sands, the basin seems to whisper across millennia, urging us to imagine the lives, choices, and wisdom of a culture that vanished yet left behind echoes still waiting to be understood. In contemplating Nabta Playa, we are reminded that human ingenuity can flourish even in harsh and unforgiving environments, but that ingenuity does not guarantee permanence. The alignment of stones, the precision of construction, and the rhythm of ritual all testify to a people deeply attuned to their land, yet whose fate remains largely mysterious. And in that mystery lies the invitation to explore, to question, and to wonder at the fragile brilliance of human civilization, both its triumphs and its vanishings, waiting patiently beneath the sands to reveal their secrets. The high desert stretches endlessly under a cobalt sky, where red cliffs rise like silent sentinels above narrow canyons. The sun casts long, jagged shadows across the sandstone, illuminating the remnants of a civilization that once thrived here. Stone pueblos, meticulously stacked and carefully aligned, cling to the edges of cliffs, their doorways and windows framing the vast emptiness beyond. Some appear almost untouched by time, while others have crumbled into fragile echoes of human ingenuity. It is here, in the ancestral homelands of the Pueblo peoples, that a question continues to haunt archaeologists, historians, and those drawn to the mysteries of the past. Why did these communities vanish so abruptly, leaving behind homes, tools, and intricate cultural traces, yet so few answers? The ancestral Puebloans, sometimes referred to as the Anasazi, though the term has fallen out of favor in favor of ancestral Pueblo peoples, were extraordinary builders. Between roughly 200 BC and 1300 AD, they established sprawling settlements across what is now the Four Corners region of the United States, encompassing parts of present-day Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. Their architectural achievements are staggering. Cliff dwellings carved into canyon walls, multi-story stone complexes, kivas for ceremonial gatherings, and intricate road networks linking distant communities. Yet by the late 13th century, something extraordinary and tragic had occurred. Entire regions were depopulated. Once thriving towns became silent. Crops were abandoned in fields. Paths that had carried generations fell into quiet disuse. Mainstream theories attempt to explain this disappearance through environmental stressors. Tree ring data indicates a series of severe droughts in the late 1200s, the so-called Great Drought, which may have lasted decades. Water sources dried up, maize crops failed, and resources that had once sustained communities dwindled. Archaeologists suggest that the resulting scarcity forced groups to migrate southward or integrate into other Puebloan populations. Conflict over limited resources may have compounded the crisis. Evidence of fortified structures and signs of violence in skeletal remains supports the idea that social tension was rising, possibly driving communities to disperse for survival. Yet even with these explanations, gaps remain. Archaeologists have uncovered abandoned food stores, caches of valuable objects, and even personal items left behind, as if their owners had simply disappeared overnight. Why would entire communities leave behind essentials for survival? Some settlements, like the cliffside complex at Mesa Verde, appear to have been evacuated in stages, while others show signs of sudden abandonment. And though migration is a plausible explanation, the sheer scale of depopulation, entire regions emptied within a few generations, continues to puzzle researchers. How could such a well-adapted, organized, and resourceful people vanish so thoroughly? Some researchers point to less tangible factors: social upheaval, shifting belief systems, or internal political strife. Could tensions within the communities have reached a tipping point, prompting coordinated relocations? Could ceremonial or cosmological beliefs have influenced decisions to abandon long-held territories? Anthropologists note that the Puebloan worldview often intertwined deeply with the land, the cycles of nature, and spiritual guidance. Perhaps what appears to us as inexplicable disappearance was, to those living it, a necessary migration guided by beliefs we can only speculate upon. Then there are questions that edge closer to the unknown. Some fringe theories suggest catastrophic environmental events, comet strikes, unprecedented seismic activity, or sudden climate anomalies as contributing factors. Others propose that external pressures, possibly from groups unknown to history, may have influenced the timing of the exodus. Scholars have debated the archaeological record for decades, but definitive evidence remains elusive. And yet, the structures themselves tell a story. Walls adorned with petroglyphs, ceremonial chambers hidden deep within cliffs, and carefully stacked stones that speak to a sophisticated understanding of architecture and astronomy. The inhabitants left behind a landscape that is both tangible and enigmatic, a puzzle carved into the very earth. Consider the intricacies of the kivas, the subterranean ceremonial chambers. Their construction reflects a careful alignment with celestial events, the solstices, equinoxes, and movements of the sun and moon. Did shifts in the heavens carry deeper meaning for these communities, perhaps signaling a moment when they chose to leave, guided by interpretations of cosmic signs now lost to us? And the roads, many of which traverse seemingly impractical distances over rugged terrain, hint at networks of communication and travel that suggest a complexity we are only beginning to grasp. Why would communities maintain such networks if the future of their settlements was uncertain? Artifacts recovered from these sites deepen the mystery. Pottery shards, finely decorated and carefully stored, suggest thriving domestic life. Tools and ornaments, some made from materials sourced hundreds of miles away, hint at trade networks that spanned the region. Yet alongside these signs of ordinary life, there are anomalies. Objects placed in patterns or caches with no clear utilitarian purpose provoke questions about ritual or symbolic practice. Were these offerings meant to protect the community, mark a transition, or perhaps preserve knowledge for those who remained or would return? And what of human remains, sometimes found in locations suggesting hurried or unusual burials? Each discovery invites both scientific explanation and a whisper of the inexplicable. Even the landscape itself seems to conspire with mystery. Canyons wind unpredictably, and hidden alcoves contain remnants that challenge our understanding of the scale and intent of settlement. Seasonal patterns of water and plant growth that supported Puebloan life for centuries shifted, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, yet the full extent of their impact remains uncertain. Modern aerial surveys and ground-penetrating radar have revealed structures previously hidden from view, suggesting that even after decades of excavation, we have yet to uncover the full extent of the ancestral Puebloan footprint. Could there be hidden settlements still waiting to be discovered, or perhaps secrets buried deliberately to protect them from those who might follow? As we explore these mysteries, one cannot ignore the human element. Oral traditions passed down through descendant communities recall stories of migration, spiritual journeys, and teachings from elders, offering glimpses into why these migrations may have occurred. While archaeology provides the physical evidence, these narratives offer context, a living thread connecting past to present. They remind us that disappearance is not always absence. It can be transformation, adaptation, or a story preserved in ways beyond the stone and soil. Yet the tension between tangible evidence and narrative leaves the mystery unresolved, inviting us to probe, to imagine, and to wonder. What becomes striking, as one traces these ancient trails and gazes at the cliff dwellings now bathed in fading sunlight, is the fragility of human endeavor against time, climate, and circumstance, and yet the enduring presence of those who came before. The walls of Pueblo Bonito, the overhanging terraces at Chaco Canyon, the intricate kivas tucked away in remote alcoves, all whisper the same question. Why did this remarkable civilization leave the land they had shaped so carefully? Were they forced out by the environment, by human conflict, by unseen forces, or did they leave intentionally, guided by principles and wisdom we may never fully comprehend? And so, as the wind stirs the desert sands and the shadows lengthen across these silent stone cities, the mystery of the mass depopulation of the ancestral Pueblo regions remains unresolved. It is a puzzle that blends fact and conjecture, science and speculation, leaving space for both rigorous inquiry and the haunting allure of the unknown. Perhaps the answer lies buried beneath layers of soil, hidden in the grooves of a cliff wall, or preserved in the stories of those who remember. Or perhaps, like the desert itself, it is a riddle meant to endure, inviting each new generation to walk the canyon floors, to study the ruins, and to wonder, what truly happened to the ancestral Pueblo peoples, and what truths of human resilience and fragility might still be waiting to be uncovered, The Sahara stretches endlessly, a vast sea of golden sand and jagged rock under a sun that seems to hang motionless in the sky. From above, the desert appears empty, a barren expanse marked only by the faint traces of wind-sculpted dunes. Yet beneath this seemingly lifeless surface lies evidence of a vibrant, interconnected world that once thrived in the heart of Africa. Oases, riverbeds, and rocky plateaus bear silent witness to the rise of trade routes that linked distant cultures, exchanged precious commodities, and fostered human ingenuity in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And yet, for reasons that continue to puzzle historians and archaeologists, these networks, once bustling with activity, wealth, and human ambition, suddenly collapsed. What caused the decline of the Sahara's ancient trade arteries, leaving behind a desert where only whispers of their existence remain? The story of Saharan trade begins long before recorded history, stretching back thousands of years to a time when the desert was not as barren as it is today. Between 3000 BC and 1000 AD, vast stretches of the Sahara were dotted with fertile valleys, seasonal rivers, and thriving settlements. Rock art found in regions such as Tassili Najar and the Caucasus Mountains depicts cattle herding, hunting scenes, and human figures adorned with elaborate garments, suggesting complex societies engaged in long-distance exchange. Archaeological evidence shows that salt, gold, ivory, and exotic animals flowed along extensive trade corridors, connecting regions as far apart as the Mediterranean coast, sub-Saharan Africa, and the Nile Valley. Caravans of camels and donkeys became the lifeblood of commerce, threading across harsh landscapes where human survival demanded ingenuity and resilience. Historical records and archaeological findings provide glimpses into this network's operation. In the first millennium AD, cities such as Gao and Timbuktu rose as key trade hubs, facilitating the exchange of salt mined from desert pans for gold extracted from distant rivers. Traders navigated vast stretches of sand, guided by celestial observation, oral knowledge, and early maps etched on parchment. The Sahara was not merely a physical barrier. It was a conduit, a living ecosystem of human activity that transformed the desert into a dynamic marketplace. And yet, for reasons still debated, by the late first millennium AD, these networks began to falter. Routes once traversed by thriving caravans grew silent, cities lost their prominence, and the desert, seemingly indifferent, reclaimed the land. Mainstream explanations point first to environmental change. Paleoclimatic studies suggest that during the first millennium AD, rainfall in the Central Sahara diminished significantly. Oases shrank or disappeared, and rivers that had once flowed consistently became seasonal or dried entirely. As water sources vanished, communities dependent on them faced impossible choices: relocate, adapt, or perish. Drought, soil depletion, and shifting sand dunes may have rendered long-established caravan paths impassable. But even with these challenges, the abruptness of the network's collapse raises questions. Why did some trade hubs survive while others vanished almost overnight? Why did certain routes close entirely, leaving behind ruins and abandoned infrastructure, while others endured for centuries longer? Beyond the environmental factors, human dynamics complicate the picture. Political instability, territorial conflicts, and the rise of competing powers could have disrupted trade flows. Caravan routes require security, trust, and the cooperation of multiple communities. Any breakdown in these conditions could have immediate consequences. Yet evidence for widespread warfare or social collapse during the precise period of decline is fragmented, leaving space for speculation. Could there have been internal disputes among traders, or tensions between regional powers that eroded cooperation? Did shifts in economic demand, such as the rise of Mediterranean cities or the emergence of alternative gold sources, redirect trade in ways that bypassed the Sahara entirely? Some mysteries emerge not from the loss of goods, but from the artifacts left behind. Rock shelters, abandoned settlements, and caravanserais suggest sudden departures. Pottery fragments and tools remain, carefully stored, as if the inhabitants intended to return. Tombs and burial sites indicate that people may have died or relocated in small numbers, but entire urban centers seem to have emptied with astonishing speed. And yet, some evidence hints at deliberate planning rather than chaotic abandonment. Walls built to last, silos filled with grain, and remnants of marketplaces organized with foresight. Could it be that the decline of Saharan trade was not merely a response to environmental or political pressures, but a strategic withdrawal, a recalibration of human activity in a changing world? Speculative theories stretch further, venturing into less conventional territory. Some researchers have proposed that sudden climate anomalies, perhaps volcanic eruptions affecting rainfall patterns, accelerated desertification. Others point to seismic activity, shifting sand dunes, or catastrophic floods in formerly fertile valleys as potential triggers. There are even fringe suggestions of epidemics, diseases spreading along caravan routes and decimating populations, though direct evidence remains scarce. Archaeologists have unearthed tools, beads, and ornaments that appear inexplicably out of place, suggesting either trade with unknown regions or cultural contact now lost to history. Each clue deepens the puzzle, a tantalizing trace of a network that once connected people across thousands of kilometers. And yet, despite centuries of investigation, some questions persist. How did traders navigate such vast, featureless terrain with remarkable accuracy? How were routes maintained over generations, even as climate and political conditions fluctuated? And perhaps most intriguingly, why did certain trade corridors vanish entirely, leaving no modern analog, while others, like routes linking West Africa to the Mediterranean, endured and evolved? Could the answers lie hidden beneath shifting sands, preserved in layers of sediment, or in ancient texts that have yet to be discovered? Or are they lost forever, swallowed by the desert that both nurtured and ultimately reclaimed these ancient networks? There is also a human dimension that transcends archaeology. Oral traditions from Saharan and sub-Saharan communities hint at mass migrations, spiritual journeys, and ancestral knowledge preserved through storytelling. Elders recall movements across the desert, the rise and fall of settlements, and encounters with travelers from distant lands. While these narratives cannot be verified in the same way as archaeological data, they offer context, a living thread that connects past human experience to the present. Perhaps the failure of the Sahara's trade networks was not simply a collapse, but a transformation, an adaptation of communities to changing circumstances, guided by wisdom we are only beginning to appreciate. As one gazes across the dunes at sunset, the desert seems to hold its secrets close, revealing only what it chooses to those willing to look deeply. Ancient caravan tracks, partially buried under centuries of sand, hint at journeys once undertaken, but much of the story remains obscured. The ruins of oases, the remnants of marketplaces, and the scattered artifacts all suggest that the Sahara was more than a desolate wasteland. It was a stage for human ingenuity, commerce, and resilience. Yet it was also a place of impermanence, where environmental shifts and the complexities of human society combined to transform a thriving network into a landscape of silence. And so, the mystery persists. The sudden failure of ancient Sahara trade networks is a story without a complete ending, a puzzle that blends evidence with conjecture and the known with the unknowable. It is a reminder that even in the harshest, most unforgiving landscapes, human civilization can flourish and vanish. The desert keeps its secrets beneath layers of sand and rock, inviting us to ask, what truly caused the collapse of these once vital connections? Were they destroyed by forces beyond human control, by choices made within societies we can only glimpse, or by factors that remain entirely hidden? The Sahara, as it has for millennia, continues to inspire awe and speculation. Every shifting dune, every hidden canyon, every eroded path may yet hold answers if we are patient enough to search. And until those answers emerge, the story of these lost trade networks lingers in the mind, a testament to human ambition, resilience, and the enduring enigma of history itself, a mystery that waits patiently beneath the endless desert sun. From the vast steppes of Siberia to the arid plains of Mesopotamia, the earth seems serene, almost timeless. Yet beneath the quiet landscape lie layers of charred soil, soot, and microscopic particles that tell a story far more violent than the surface suggests. These traces, scattered across continents, point to a mysterious phenomenon, a global fire event in antiquity that remains largely unexplained. Archaeologists, geologists, and climate scientists alike have puzzled over these anomalies for decades. How could fires so intense leave evidence in such disparate regions, spanning thousands of kilometers, yet leave no clear origin? The answer may lie buried, quite literally, in the ash beneath our feet. The story begins around 2350 BC, a period that appears to have been marked by dramatic upheavals across the planet. In the Fertile Crescent, the heart of early human civilization, settlements that had flourished for centuries show signs of sudden destruction. Mud brick walls collapse under layers of blackened ash. Charred wooden beams and household items lie as if abandoned mid-use. Sites along the Tigris and Euphrates show evidence of widespread burning, with some entire towns reduced to smoldering ruins. This period coincides roughly with the decline of several prominent urban centers, raising questions about the potential role of catastrophic fire in reshaping early human societies. Thousands of miles away, in the arid deserts of North Africa, sediment cores from ancient lakebeds reveal unusually high concentrations of soot and carbon dating to the same period. The Sahara, already a harsh environment, shows evidence that extensive fires may have swept across its grasslands and scrublands, altering ecosystems and perhaps contributing to the collapse of regional trade networks. Could these fires have been natural, ignited by lightning and spread across parched landscapes? Or was there some other, more extraordinary trigger? Further north, in Europe, ice cores extracted from Greenland and the Alps reveal elevated levels of ammonium and other particulate matter that correspond with the same epoch. Scientists suggest these anomalies indicate a spike in atmospheric carbon and widespread combustion. The scale is staggering. Evidence points to fires so intense that they affected air quality globally, leaving a fingerprint that would endure for millennia. And yet, despite the magnitude, no single source of ignition can fully explain the pattern. This event, whatever its origin, seems to have transcended conventional natural disasters. Mainstream explanations offer several possibilities. Some researchers argue for large-scale climate fluctuations. During this period, certain regions experienced extreme drought, creating conditions ripe for wildfires. Vegetation would have been tinder dry, and any spark, natural or human, could have ignited flames that spread rapidly. Volcanic activity is another candidate. Eruptions release massive amounts of heat, ash, and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, sometimes igniting secondary fires over vast areas. And human activity, though limited by ancient technology, cannot be discounted. Agricultural clearing, accidental fires, and early metallurgical processes may have contributed locally, but the global scale remains difficult to reconcile. Yet even with these conventional explanations, anomalies persist. In Siberia, analysis of peat and lake sediments reveals charcoal layers of a type that typically forms only under extremely high temperatures. In North America, similar blackened layers suggest fire intensity beyond that produced by typical wildfires. In Mesopotamia and surrounding regions, burned clay fragments show signs of melting, suggesting exposure to heat exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, far hotter than normal fires. How could such heat have been generated over such vast and distant regions nearly simultaneously? Some researchers have explored less conventional theories. Cosmic impacts, for example, could account for sudden, widespread ignition. A comet or asteroid fragment entering Earth's atmosphere might create shock waves, heat the surface, and trigger fires across continents. Tiny spherules of glass, sometimes found in these ancient layers, hint at extreme heating events consistent with cosmic impact scenarios. Could a fragment have exploded in the atmosphere, releasing energy sufficient to ignite forests, grasslands, and settlements in multiple regions at once? The evidence is tantalizing but incomplete. No impact crater of sufficient size from this period has been conclusively identified, leaving the theory in the realm of informed speculation. Other possibilities are more subtle, almost poetic in their mystery. Some researchers suggest that extraordinary solar activity could have played a role, perhaps triggering atmospheric phenomena or lightning storms intense enough to spark massive fires. Others ponder the interaction of human societies with these forces, whether early civilizations were unwitting participants in their own destruction, or whether these fires catalyzed migrations, social upheavals, and the transformation of cultures in ways we can barely reconstruct. Did the flames shape human history as much as the droughts, wars, and political shifts of the time? What makes this event especially compelling is its apparent synchronicity. The evidence does not suggest isolated disasters, but a pattern repeated across continents within a narrow window of time. The magnitude and uniformity hint at a global or near-global cause, yet the origin remains obscured. Historians note that this period coincides with abrupt collapses in civilizations far apart, the decline of urban centers in Mesopotamia, disruptions in the Indus Valley, and the abandonment of settlements in regions of North America. Could these collapses share a common catalyst in fire, perhaps amplified by environmental stressors and human vulnerability? Archaeological findings reinforce the sense of urgency and disruption. Charred tools, scorched pottery, and blackened ceremonial objects suggest not only destruction, but also the sudden interruption of daily life. In some regions, deposits of soot are found atop layers of ash where crops had been stored, indicating that food supplies were lost in flames. Ritual spaces, sometimes meticulously preserved for generations, show evidence of fire that seems out of place, almost deliberate. Were these fires a natural disaster, a cosmic accident, or could human ritual or conflict have contributed in ways now obscured by time? Even the ecosystems tell a story. Palynological studies, analysis of pollen in soil, show abrupt declines in vegetation corresponding with soot layers, suggesting fires reshaped landscapes and forced animal populations to migrate. Large herbivores, essential for early pastoral communities, disappeared or relocated, adding pressure to human populations already struggling with environmental stress. The chain reaction appears almost unstoppable. Fire alters the land affects survival. Survival shapes societies. Yet the precise trigger, the spark that ignited the global conflagration, remains hidden, like a cipher lost to time. As we trace the faint signature of this ancient fire event across continents, one cannot help but reflect on the fragility of human civilization in the face of forces that transcend borders, cultures, and even time itself. The traces of ash, the layers of carbon, the melted clay, and the blackened artifacts form a haunting testament to a world suddenly transformed by fire. And yet, the origins, intent, and full scope of the event remain tantalizingly out of reach, inviting continued investigation, speculation, and wonder. What truly ignited the global fires of antiquity? Was it a cosmic visitor streaking across the sky, a subtle shift in climate amplified by human activity, or some combination of factors we have yet to fully comprehend? Did these flames reshape the course of early civilizations, nudging them toward collapse, migration, and transformation? And perhaps most profoundly, are there remnants of this event still waiting to be discovered, lying buried beneath layers of soil, sand, and sediment, ready to reveal secrets about the forces that shaped our distant past? As the wind stirs over the plains and deserts where evidence lies hidden, the earth itself seems to whisper, urging us to look closer, think deeper, and acknowledge the mysteries that endure. The unidentified global fire event of antiquity is a puzzle not yet solved, a story that blends fact with enigma, science with speculation, and history with the unknown. It reminds us that the past is not merely a record of human endeavor, but a living, dynamic interplay of forces both understood and mysterious, leaving us to wonder what other secrets of our world may still be waiting to emerge from the ashes. The Guadalquivir River winds gently through the sun-drenched plains of southern Iberia, its waters glinting like liquid gold beneath the Mediterranean sky. Once its banks cradled a civilization so prosperous and enigmatic that even the ancients spoke of its wealth in whispers. Tartessos. Cities of stone and clay thrived near the river's mouth, where fertile lands met the Atlantic, their marketplaces brimming with silver, tin, and gold. Ancient authors such as Herodotus and Strabo described Tartessos as a kingdom of extraordinary wealth, a hub of maritime trade stretching from the western Mediterranean to the distant coasts of North Africa and the British Isles. And yet, for all its renown, Tartessos vanished from history. Its disappearance remains one of the enduring mysteries of the ancient world, a civilization that flourished, then simply ceased to exist. Archaeologists have traced Tartessos to the southern Iberian region, particularly near the Guadalquivir estuary. Excavations reveal a network of settlements that were highly organized, with evidence of monumental architecture, metalworking workshops, and urban planning far beyond what one might expect for the period. Silver mines in the surrounding hills fed the economy, while trade networks connected the Tartessians with Phoenician and Mediterranean cultures, exchanging tin, copper, and exquisite crafted goods for luxury items and knowledge. The wealth of Tartessos was legendary, its influence reaching across the sea, yet by around the 6th century BC, the civilization had largely disappeared, leaving behind only traces in myth, scattered ruins, and fleeting references in ancient texts. Mainstream explanations for Tartessos's fall often center on a combination of environmental and economic factors. The region was subject to shifting river courses, periodic flooding, and fluctuating climate conditions, all of which could have impacted agriculture and the sustainability of urban centers. Some scholars suggest that overexploitation of natural resources, especially the silver and tin mines, may have undermined the economic foundation of the kingdom. Trade routes that once funneled wealth into Tartessos may have shifted, either due to political upheavals elsewhere in the Mediterranean or the rise of competing powers, gradually isolating the civilization. Yet, even these plausible factors do not fully explain the suddenness and scale of Tartessos's disappearance. Unlike other ancient cultures that left a clear trail of decline or conquest, Tartessos seems to have faded quietly, almost imperceptibly, from the historical record. The mysterious nature of its fall is compounded by the scarcity of written records. Most of what is known about Tartessos comes from secondary sources, Greek and Roman writers who mentioned its wealth, its kings, and its influence, but whose accounts are fragmentary and often steeped in legend. Herodotus described the Tartessians as a people rich in silver and skilled in maritime trade, yet he offers no details about the circumstances of their disappearance. Strabo refers to a lost city somewhere near the mouth of the Guadalquivir, a place of commerce and culture now vanished beneath the sands and waters. Archaeological evidence aligns with these accounts in some ways, but gaps remain that invite speculation, and the contrast between Tartessos's documented prosperity and its sudden absence only deepens the enigma. Some researchers turn to natural disasters as potential explanations. Earthquakes and flooding are both plausible threats in the Guadalquivir Basin. The region sits near active fault lines, and seismic activity could have caused catastrophic destruction of urban centers or disrupted trade networks. Tsunamis generated along the Atlantic coast may have inundated settlements near the river's mouth, rendering them uninhabitable. Yet these explanations, while compelling, struggle to account for the apparent cultural continuity that seems to linger in the surrounding regions. Artifacts suggest that the people of Tartessos did not vanish entirely. They may have migrated, assimilated with neighboring communities, or adapted to new environments, but the scale of disappearance remains striking. Economic and geopolitical shifts may also have played a role. The rise of Carthaginian and Phoenician colonies in southern Iberia could have disrupted Tartessian trade or imposed political pressures that the kingdom could not withstand. Competition for resources and influence may have created tensions that, combined with environmental stressors, accelerated decline. Yet if conquest or assimilation occurred, why is there so little direct evidence of military action or enforced displacement? The lack of written records within Tartessos itself leaves us with only indirect clues, forcing modern historians to reconstruct events from archaeology, geology, and the occasional classical reference. Other theories venture into more speculative territory. Some scholars suggest that Tartessos may have suffered from societal collapse linked to internal strife or economic mismanagement. Could the kingdom's wealth have fostered inequality or political instability, weakening its ability to respond to natural or external threats? There are even hypotheses that suggest a rapid climate anomaly, perhaps related to broader environmental events such as those affecting the Sahara or the eastern Mediterranean, may have disrupted agriculture and forced mass migrations. The tantalizing possibility exists that Tartessos, like other ancient civilizations, was subject to forces both human and natural, converging to create a sudden disappearance that still defies explanation. Archaeological discoveries continue to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Excavations in the Guadalquivir Delta reveal remnants of harbors, docks, and warehouses, some submerged beneath layers of sediment, suggesting changes in river courses or rising sea levels. Pottery fragments, ornaments, and tools indicate a high level of craftsmanship and daily life abruptly interrupted. Charred remains hint at fires, while collapsed structures suggest sudden abandonment rather than slow decay. And yet, the absence of clear burial sites or records of conflict leaves questions unanswered. Did the people of Tartessos flee, perish, or merge with neighboring populations in ways that erased the distinctiveness of their culture? The myths surrounding Tartessos add another layer to its enigmatic aura. Greek accounts speak of kings whose wealth was legendary, of cities lined with gold, and of treasures that disappeared along with the civilization itself. Some suggest that Tartessos was more than a kingdom. It was a symbol of ancient prosperity, its story preserved in allegory and legend as much as in history. Could the mythologizing of Tartessos reflect a collective memory of disaster, a way for neighboring cultures to make sense of a sudden absence? And if so, what truths might these stories conceal about the forces, natural, human, or otherwise, that ended its reign? Even the very geography of Tartessos hints at deeper mysteries. The Guadalquivir Delta and surrounding plains have shifted over millennia, hiding ancient settlements beneath layers of silt, sand, and water. Could the remains of the kingdom lie buried, waiting for future exploration to reveal the answers? Recent advances in geophysical surveying and underwater archaeology may one day uncover settlements, ports, and structures that could shed light on the final days of Tartessos. Yet for now, much remains speculative. As we contemplate the disappearance of this ancient civilization, one is struck by the fragility and transience of human achievement. Tartessos thrived, innovated, and traded across continents, yet vanished in a way that leaves only faint traces. The rivers continued to flow, the land remained fertile, and the Mediterranean trade continued. But the kingdom itself was gone. Its fall reminds us that even the most prosperous societies are vulnerable to forces beyond their control, whether environmental, economic, or human. And so, the mystery of Tartessos endures. Was its disappearance the result of climate change, shifting rivers, rising seas, or seismic catastrophe? Did internal instability or external conquest play a role? Or was it a convergence of multiple forces, creating a perfect storm that erased a civilization from the historical record? The evidence tantalizes without answering, leaving us to imagine what life in Tartessos may have been like, and to wonder what secrets still lie buried beneath the Guadalquivir Delta, the sands of southern Iberia, and the myths that surround it. In the end, Tartessos serves as a reminder that history is often incomplete, that civilizations rise and fall in ways that leave tantalizing traces rather than clear narratives. Its ruins, submerged structures, and scattered artifacts whisper of human ingenuity, wealth, and vulnerability, challenging us to look closer, question more deeply, and embrace the unknown. And as the sun sets over the plains where Tartessos once flourished, we are left with the enduring question: what truly caused the fall of this extraordinary civilization, and what fragments of its story remain hidden, waiting to be discovered? As we look toward this future, the mystery of Tartessos continues to inspire both curiosity and scholarly exploration. New technologies such as remote sensing and satellite imagery offer hope that hidden archaeological sites could soon be uncovered. These advancements may provide crucial insights into the ancient kingdom's final years, its collapse, and the legacy it left behind. Yet, even as the tools of archaeology evolve, the intangible essence of Tartessos, its culture, its people, its very identity, may always remain elusive. The challenge for future generations will not only be to unearth physical remnants, but also to understand the intricate weave of myth, history, and imagination that surrounds this lost civilization. Tartessos serves as a poignant reminder that, despite our advances in technology and knowledge, some stories may never be fully written. The narrative of human civilization is far from linear, and the rise and fall of empires, whether lost to time or erased by nature's forces, are reminders of our collective vulnerability. The fall of Tartessos, like the disappearance of other ancient cultures, invites us to reflect on the impermanence of human achievements. In the face of time's relentless march, even the most flourishing civilizations are but fleeting moments in the broader span of history. Ultimately, the disappearance of Tartessos calls upon us to reconsider the fragility of the societies we build today. Just as the sun sets over the plains where this once great civilization thrived, we are reminded that the legacy of any culture is shaped by both its triumphs and its tragedies. The knowledge we gain from studying civilizations like Tartessos enriches our understanding of human resilience, reminding us that while the end of one story may be shrouded in mystery, it also opens the door to endless questions and possibilities about our shared past.